Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Broccoli Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Trained by Villain Giran. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Tiger, burning bright. Izuku paused outside the door to the apartment, sniffling as quietly as possible and looking himself over anxiously to make sure none of his new scrapes and bruises and burns were visible. Kakin and his friends had hurt him again today, beaten him up and left him on the ground in the park all alone, just 'cause he had asked if he could play with them. He didn't want his Kachin to see how hurt he was, because she already worried so much, and last time she'd called the school and argued with the principal, and then his teacher had to scold his classmates, and then everything just got worse, and Izuku just didn't want to make her worry. That was all. He didn't want to be hurt more than usual just because she tried to help him. Wiping away any leftover tears off his face, Izuku pulled a bright smile up on his face. Always smile, always, smile like all might and don't let the hurt show through. He'd be fine. He just had to keep smiling and everything would be fine, fine. And reached forward, turning the doorknob and opening his mouth to call a cheerful-sounding greeting into the apartment, but his Kachin's voice silenced him, making him still, wide-eyed, with the door barely cracked. "You can't do that, Hisashi," she shouted, tearful and anguished. "We need that money. How are we going to pay rent if you stop sending money?" Frozen, Izuku blinked uncertainly as he realized his Kachin must be on the phone with Tuchan. He was the only Hisashi Izuku knew, and he sent money over from America where he worked for a big support company there. "I don't know what you want me to say, Inko." Tuchan's voice, tiny and scratchy with static, shouted back. "I can't afford to keep sending so much over there when I'm barely making enough money to feed myself as well. The pay cuts and job cuts are getting more and more drastic, honey, and There was a sharp, static Y sound, his Tuchan letting out a loud, frustrated sigh. "It'll only be for a few months at most. Just until this job panic has settled down, okay? I'm still sending the money for this month, but after that, you're going to have to figure something out. I'm sorry, Inko. I'll call you back later. I've got to go." There was a click, a static Y beep, and then silence. Izuku swallowed, hesitating, wide-eyed and teary in the doorway, before a harsh, short sob from his Kachin had him carefully pulling the door shut, guilt curdling in his tummy as he paused outside the closed door. He could still hear his Kachin crying. Eyes burning, throat tight, Izuku spun away from the door and ran away. Running, always running, from Kakin, from his classmates, from himself, always running, stupid coward, stupid Deku. Izuku ran, red shoes pounding first down the stairs then down the sidewalk, breathes gasping as tears ran down his face. He ran until he tripped, hands and knees scraped raw and bloody, before he pushed himself up and continued running. He fell, twice more, before he finally stopped getting back up, arms and legs shaking with exhaustion, chest heaving and painful, face buried in the grass as he shuddered and wept weakly into the dirt. Where stupid, worthless, quirkless Deku should be. He laid there crying for a long time, until his head felt empty and his whole body felt heavy and he kinda wanted to sleep but also really didn't, and only then did he roll over. Feeling almost floaty, Izuku laid there, staring up at the slow-moving clouds way up above, at the rustling leaves of the tree nearby, at the weird little wisps of smoke coming from nearby, his dull, aching eyes slowly tracing the wisps as they curled and twisted through the air above him, slowly registering the smell of cigarette smoke, like the kind old Yamamoto-san down the hall liked to smoke. "You alive there, kid?" A bored-sounding man's voice called. Izuku blinked slowly, before weakly heaving himself upwards so he was sitting limply on the ground instead of lying there. Vaguely, he recognized the area as one of the further parks he and Kakin used to play at before Izuku found out he was quirkless. He'd somehow ran all the way to the little grove of trees further in the back, where they'd only been allowed when their Kachins had been nearby because sometimes big kids and grown-ups liked to sell bad stuff there. There was a man sitting on the same bench his Kachin and Mitsukio Bacon would sit and talk. He was wearing a purple, ruffled suit and pale yellow, ruffled-up kind of scarf. He had pale gray-purple hair and round sunglasses on, and was smoking a cigarette as he looked over some papers on his crossed knee. He wasn't even looking at Izuku, looking boredly at the papers in his hold instead, for all the world like he didn't care that Izuku was there at all. But he hadn't left Izuku on the ground by himself, not like everyone else always had when they recognized him as the quirkless kid of Mizurufu. "Well?" the man asked, blowing out a lungful of smoke, exposing a large gap in his teeth as he leaned back a little, finally glancing over at Izuku and arching a brow. "What?" Izuku managed, voice cracking and shaky as he stared. The man huffed, running a large hand over his head and closing his eyes as he tilted his head back. "The sake, kid?" he groused, flicking ash from his cigarette. "Okay?" he asked clearly, pointedly, sending Izuku a look that the boy was well used to receiving, the mocking, almost pitying, "Are you stupid or something?" look that his teachers sometimes gave him when he said he wanted to be a hero or started going off on a tangent. Izuku flinched, looking away from the man to stare down at his lap, peering unhappily as his badly scraped knees and palms, the tears in his pants that he began to pick at unhappily. "Fine," he muttered. The man cursed lowly, letting out a frustrated sigh that Izuku was also familiar with. "Goddamn it, just a huff of air." "Come here, kid," the man ordered, heaving himself to his feet and dropping his thick bundle of papers on the bench. He sauntered over to Izuku, reached down and, ignoring Izuku's immediate flinch, hooked his large hands into Izuku's armpits and lifted him straight up and onto his feet, holding him just long enough to make sure the boy wasn't about to fall again. "There," he said, reaching up and taking the cigarette from his mouth to heave out another lungful of smoke. "Now, I'd have to be blind and dumb as well as ugly to not notice that. You're not fine, kiddo, but I ain't gonna fuss if you don't want to fuss," the man drawled, staring down at Izuku with sharp eyes behind those round glasses. Izuku flinched slightly and shook his head, looking down and away, stinging, painful hands clenching and unclenching along his shirt hem. "Thought so," the man grunted, once again dragging a hand through his hair, tucking his other hand into his pocket as he looked up at the sky with something like mild exasperation as he blew smoke out through his nose. Izuku peered up at him uncertainly, not used to adults just doing this. Caring, however vaguely. "Mister?" Izuku asked quietly, uncertainly. The man huffed slightly, rocking on his heels, before sighing and turning away to wander back over to his bench. Izuku hesitated, but the man hadn't told him to leave or to stay. Hadn't done anything mean at all, in fact, or creepy like they were warned about. The man sat back down and went back to slowly flipping through his papers, acting for all the world as if he hadn't just helped Izuku up off the ground at all. He just threw his old cigarette butt away and lit a new one, and Izuku didn't know how to react, to be honest. Adults had always treated Izuku a few different ways. They cared, almost suffocatingly so, like he was a baby that could be hurt by breathing too much air or that he would break his legs if he ran too fast. Or they treated him like he was some sick person that was contagious, like he had chickenpox and the flu combined and shouldn't be allowed in the same room as them, let alone their children. Or they treated him like Kakin. "You just gonna stand there staring, kid?" the man asked boredly. Izuku flinched, startled, before uncertainly creeping closer. He hesitated at the bench, but the man didn't move beyond flicking ash from his cigarette, and Izuku carefully, slowly, scrambled up to sit uncertainly next to him. He shifted around uncertainly, before peering shyly up at the man, who flicked his eyes towards Izuku without moving his head, lips quirking up a little bit at the corner briefly, before lifting his face and blowing a smoke ring. "Whoa," Izuku breathed, eyes going wide. "Is that your quirk, mister?" The man chuckled. "Nah, kid, that's just experience. Quirks don't have a monopoly on good old-fashioned hard work, you know," he drawled, chuckling, before blowing another smoke ring. "Kids these days, it's all about the quirks. Nobody's teaching their brats about hard work no more. How to hold a job, get by, make money without being some big-shot hero." Izuku lifted his head sharply, focusing on the man with wide eyes. "How?" he asked. The man blinked, looking mildly surprised at Izuku's suddenly loud voice. How do you make money without a strong quirk? The man arched a brow, and Izuku fought with himself, wanted to cringe away and apologize but needing to know the answer. His Kachan's sobbing was loud despite the thick door closed tightly between them. Why'd you want to know, kid? He drawled. Izuku looked away briefly, lips thinning and stinging hands tightening into fists on his equally painful knees. Tu-chan isn't gonna be sending money anymore, he stated quietly, staring down at his knees, at his white-knuckled, dirty hands, the smears of blood on his freckled skin. Kachan can't make enough to pay rent anymore without him sending money. And after this month he's gonna stop, so I need to know so I can help, so I'm not useless even if I don't have a Q quirk, he managed, swallowing around the tight knot in his throat, before he made himself look up, braced for the man's expression to be different, for the man to be different. Everyone else had changed when they found out. Had become meaner, crueler, more cautious, as if he would break hurt die as if he should. But instead of changing, the man was watching him the same way, brow arched, and smoke curling from his nostrils as he breathed it all out slowly. The man hummed lowly, flicking ash off his cigarette. Well, kid, I can understand that, the man stated calmly, making Izuku flinch slightly, now in surprise, his braced shoulders loosening as he stared, wide-eyed, up at the man. Had a deadbeat dad myself. Used to beat on my ma, before she took my sister and me and left. Had to get a job young, worked hard to get where I am today, you know? He waved his cigarette at himself vaguely. So, you want to know how to make money without some fancy but quirk to get it? Izuku nodded quickly, leaning forward as the man flicked the butt away after one last long drag. The man tilted his head and eyed Izuku with another one of those half-smirk smile mouth twitches. First thing you gotta do, kiddo, is find the things you're good at, the man told him. Izuku leaned forward a little more, eyes wide and intense, obviously working to memorize the man's words. You find what you're good at, you hoard it, make it better and practice until you're better at it than anyone around you. Izuku nodded slightly as the man leaned over, lips curling, gap on display, teeth white and glinting in the sunlight. Then you take this skills asset, this thing only you can provide, and you make sure that people around you need it. Need your skills, your special thing, need you, and you make sure they're willing to pay for it, no matter the price. And kid, this is important, he added, something strangely stern in his voice as Izuku, wide-eyed and wondering, nodded seriously along. You make sure no one else can do what you can do. If that means you gotta be mean, gotta get nasty so that any competition thinks 10 times before they consider stepping in your way, then you make sure that you're meaner than any other sumbitch around. 'Cause the moment you're not at the top of that list, the highest on that ladder, you're gonna fall straight into that pit at the bottom and lose everything. You get me? I think so, Izuku whispered, sitting back and nibbling his lower lip thoughtfully. The man hummed, reaching out and ruffling Izuku's hair with something like fondness even as he, too, sat back and started once again flicking through his papers. Find something I'm good at, Izuku wondered, frowning and glaring slightly at his knees. He wasn't really good at anything. He wasn't good at sports, and his homework was okay, but he didn't know if it was good, 'cause if it wasn't getting torn up or stolen, it had to be lower than Kakin's or he'd get blown up. The only thing he could think of was good, he supposed, would be his hero analysis, but anyone could do that, it was just fanboy stuff. You make sure no one else can do what you can do. If that means you gotta be mean, gotta get nasty so that any competition thinks 10 times before they consider stepping in your way, then you make sure that you're meaner than any other sumbitch around. I don't have to be the best at it, he realized slowly. I just have to make sure I'm the only option. Relieved, knowing that now he at least had a place to start, Izuku turned his head to smile at the man next to him, before his eyes caught, finally, on what was on the man's papers. They were hero notes? Izuku tilted his head, peering curiously at the papers, and the man noticed, chuckling slightly and even tilting the papers a bit more so Izuku could read them better, looking over the list of what Izuku realized were streets and times. Patrol routes. Izuku realized, interest peaking intensely as he focused on the information, eyes darting to and fro over the paper hungrily, focus locking onto the hero information neatly typed out in front of him. Got a client who wants info on this guy, the man told Izuku easily, tapping a finger on the picture of what Izuku recognized as a slightly newer hero named Sphere. My guy has work in the area this guy patrols, but let's just say they don't get along too well, and he wants to know when best to do his business so that no, unfortunate meetups happen. Izuku nodded absently, not really considering the whys of that statement. After all, he learned as much as he could about Kaken and his friends' moods so he could avoid them, sometimes, and knowing when it was an okay day to follow them or to avoid them meant he avoided new injuries sometimes. It made sense that grown-ups would want to avoid bullies too. Even if this was a hero and heroes were the good guys, not the bullies. Kaken wanted to be a hero, was going to be a hero, even as he hurt Izuku and never said sorry. Why? What made him change? This part's wrong, Izuku told the man distractedly, eyes darting over the paper as he reached out and tapped a line of information. Sphere likes to work with Leaper on weekends, 'cause their quirks, synergize really well, and they tend to patrol different areas on these days so that their team-ups seem, more potent, he muttered, eyes darting over the paper, fingers twitching, wanting to take the packet from the man and go over it himself but also knowing what it was like when someone went through your work without asking permission. Oh really? The man asked. Izuku nodded firmly, because he knew this, he'd watched the news clips and read the articles. Sphere's quirk, Energy Orb, makes large bubble-like spheres of energy that he can use as both shields and containers, Izuku told the man earnestly, sitting up. He uses it most often to encircle himself or villains, and when he uses it on himself, he can spin himself fast enough to send himself flying through the air. Izuku's hands moved up and around, flailing as excitement filled him, eyes sparkling as he described the quirk. Leaper's got, a kangaroo-like mutation-based quirk that lets her leap off solid things to heights up to 10 meters. And when they work together, she often uses her quirk to kick Sphere's orbs and can make them go so far. The man chuckled, smirking down at Izuku as he sputtered to a stop, ears going pink as the man reached over and ruffled his hair again. Breathe, kiddo, the man chuckled, shaking his head as Izuku shakily, sheepishly obeyed, smiling shyly as something fluttering and bubbly like nervous happiness and hope. Something else made his stomach lighter and his chest less tight. The man wasn't telling him to shut up, or stop rambling, or just going like his Kachen did sometimes. I really like knowing about heroes, Izuku told the man shyly, sheepishly. And quirks. I like learning all about quirks. Never would have guessed, kiddo, the man chuckled, before eyeing Izuku thoughtfully. After a moment, he quirked his lips in another one of those half-smirk half-smiles, white teeth glinting and gap on display, before he leaned forward and shook the packet of information almost teasingly at Izuku, pulling a pen out of his pocket and tapping it against the papers. So, since you're the expert on this, wanna tell me anything else that's wrong here? He asked. Izuku lit up, opening his mouth and eagerly reaching forward. Then you take this skills asset, this thing only you can provide, and you make sure that people around you need it. Need your skills, your special thing, need you, and you make sure they're willing to pay for it, no matter the price. Abruptly, Izuku remembered how this whole thing happened, why he was sitting there on that bench, what this man had already told him. Swallowing, mouth closing, eyes darting from the paper and to the man again, Izuku took a deep breath, anxiousness bubbling up in his stomach, and licked his lip nervously. Are you willing to pay for it? He stuttered out, resisting the urge to cringe and flinch guiltily, and beside him, the man's eyebrows rose. Izuku swallowed down that guilty feeling, remembering his Kachen's sobbing, remembering this man's own words, and made himself lift his head and meet the man's eyes with a wobbly, shaky smile. He wasn't expecting the man to throw his head back, crowing with laughter. Eyes wide, tense shoulders loosening again, Izuku watched the man laugh with something like relief. He's not mad, Izuku thought, almost giddily as his wobbly smile brightened. That's right, kid. The man laughed, leaning forward and grinning fiercely at Izuku, like a tiger, fierce and strong and daring the world to say something to him. Izuku wanted to smile like that, like a challenge, like he was just daring the world to try and push him down. It seemed so much stronger than anything he'd even seen, stronger than All Might's smile, which was bright and brave but didn't seem real sometimes. That was a smile that said, "I am here." But this was a smile that said, "I am here to stay, despite what you want." Izuku wanted to be able to smile like that. "The name is Giran, kiddo," he told Izuku, offering one large hand alongside his tiger-sharp smile. "Let's talk business, shall we?" Heart-pounding, eyes bright, Izuku beamed brightly back at the man, at Giran, and clasped that large hand with his own tiny, dirty, bloody scraped one, shaking firmly just like his Tuchan taught him when he was little. "Let's," he chirped, and Giran chuckled. Izuku heads home with half of the next month's worth of rent in a tight bundle in his pocket and an agreement to meet Giran again the next weekend on the same bench to negotiate for more information. He's eager to tell his Kachin about how much fun he had at the park, about his new friend Giran who told him his analysis was smart and not weird. He notices that it lifts a weight of his Kachin's bowed, shaky shoulders, makes her watery smile brighter, and hides the money away in his closet inside a broken All Might Collector's Edition lunchbox. He doesn't tell her everything, doesn't want to make her worry or for her to try and stop him. He had a way to help his Kachin now, a way to prove that he wasn't just worthless, quirkless Deku. That night, as he stands in the bathroom on his All Might stepstool, he looked at his reflection in the mirror and practices his smile. Not his All Might smile, no, he wasn't going to smile like that, not anymore. Izuku met his reflection's eyes, tried to narrow them just the right way, and curled his lips up, teeth glinting in the bathroom's bright light, eyes glittering determinedly back at himself. A new goal set and new plans starting to form. Every tiger was once a weak, stumbling little cub. That didn't make their teeth any less sharp. "Tiger, tiger, burning bright. I'm going out, Kachin." Izuku called into the apartment happily as he ran to the door, his backpack full to bursting with a mix of analysis notebooks, information packets, empty notebooks, pens, highlighters, and his new laptop. He was all but vibrating as he eagerly started putting his shoes on, as his Kachin poked her head around the kitchen doorway with a wobbly, relieved smile. Okay, Dizukin," she replied. "Are you going over to Katsuki-kun's?" Izuku bit back an automatic flinch, the new burns on his upper back stinging at the name, and Izuku made a point to check and retie his shoelaces so he wouldn't have to meet his Kachin's hopeful eyes. And not today," he managed. "I'm gonna go to the park." Kachin blinked and hesitated, biting her lips. Are you going to see that Giran-san?" she asked carefully, worriedly. Izuku shrugged honestly. "I dunno," he replied simply, honestly. "I hope he's back from his business trip, but it was a big job in Tokyo, you know? He's a mediator for people who don't get along, I think? I dunno what it's really called, but he makes sure people who don't want to be near one another can move around and do their jobs and stuff without having to see one another at all. And he also does research like I like to do. And he does analysis too, and says that mine's really, really good. So, I hope I see him today, but if I don't, that's okay. I'm gonna work on organizing my analysis and stuff so I can summarize and share it better. 'Cause Giran-san says that in business you gotta, dumb things down for clients sometimes? Even if they aren't dumb, because a lot of people aren't dumb but they, don't want to read 8 paragraphs if they can just read one, you know? Sometime in his babbling, his Kachin had relaxed, a rueful, almost sad smile on her face, and Izuku wondered when her smiles had started turning more sad than happy. He knew the exact day, the moment the word, quirkless, had left that mean doctor's mouth 3 years before. He knew when, because that's when his smile stopped being as happy too. "Well, as long as you're back in time for dinner, sweetie," his Kachin told him. Izuku beamed, bobbing his head before he hopped back to his feet, threw his fists in the air determinedly, and chirped a happy, "Bye, Kachin," before running out the door towards a familiar, distant park and a group of trees where shady people did shady things. He didn't like not telling his Kachin the whole truth about Giran-san. He knew she'd worry, was already worrying, but he also knew that he couldn't give these meetings up. He'd already given up so much, too much, no more. His meetings with Giran-san were the best parts of whatever day they landed on. They often made up for all the bad times for the entire week. Giran-san made him feel smart, made him feel useful. The older man wasn't a good guy, he wasn't a hero or anything, would laugh himself sick if anyone said he was, but, secretly, inside Izuku's heart of hearts, where he hid away how much he hated the way Kaken treated him, hated his school and teachers and classmates and his Tuchan across the sea, and sometimes, hated his Kachen for not believing in him. In that secret quiet place that he wouldn't let anybody into? Giran-san was Izuku's hero. And he didn't want to lose that. Midoriya Izuku was worried. She was worried and suspicious, and she wasn't sure she had any right to be. Her little boy he was happy again, he was smiling and babbling about his notes again for the first time in a year. He was coming home and was excited to go outside again, instead of holding himself up in his room and watching hero fights and All Might's debut. He was having fun, he was happy. Just wasn't happy with her. Because of her. She remembered playing heroes with him. Of making matcha together. Of listening to him babble about heroes and All Might and Kaken. But, after the diagnosis, Izuku he was just as bright, but quieter with it, more subdued. And as time went on, he became quieter and quieter. He cried more, but not to her. She'd hear him crying in his room sometimes, on the days where he came home from school, and his smile was so wide and tight it hurt her to see it. He started hiding things from her, he stopped babbling as much, started mumbling and flinching as sudden movements and loud noises, and she tried so hard, she tried to make him feel safe, to make him happy, but nothing worked. She splurged on All Might posters and action figures and toys, on hero merch and movies. She made him katsudon as often as possible, asked him about his day, tried to get him to talk to her about his friends at school, about his homework, about anything besides All Might, and even then she asked him about heroes when the muttering and silence grew too long. Hisashi tried to tell her that it was fine, that Izuku was just trying to adjust to being quirkless, that the teachers would make sure nothing bad was happening, especially after her call to the principal the one time her baby came home covered in bruises. She hadn't seen any since then, but she was sure there were more. Izuku had become secretive, more skittish, right after that day. She'd thought it was because he was scared of getting beaten again, that he was just trying to get his trust in his teachers and schoolmates back. But as months passed, she found herself more certain that the beatings and bullying had not only continued, but gotten worse. He may not come to her with tears asking for boo-boo kisses and hero-themed band-aids anymore, but he couldn't hide everything. Blood stains on the inside of his clothes, tear stains in books, shredded pieces of what she recognized as homework. Sweet-scented burns in his shirts. Inko had known Mitsuki since she was a kid, had known Masaru since high school. She'd been there when Masaru asked Mitsuki out, when he proposed, when they were married. They'd hosted each other's baby showers, spent hours complaining to one another about cravings and swollen ankles. Made the other their baby's godparents. They'd been there for every up and down of infancy and toddlerhood, every middle-of-the-night doubt and panicked doctor's visit when their babies got into trouble. The Bakugus had been with her when Hisashi had served her with divorce papers so he could follow his job to America, and the woman he'd cheated on her with as well. Mitsuki had held her as she wept, Mau had broken Hisashi's nose, and they'd moved in with her and Izuku for 6 months as the papers went through. She loved Mitsuki as her sister, Masaru as her brother, Katsuki as her nephew. She adored them. They were the only family she'd ever had besides Izuku and Hisashi. She knew that, if anything happened to her, they'd take Izuku in a heartbeat and love him as their own. She couldn't imagine Katsuki hurting her baby. She couldn't. Just like she couldn't accept the signs of Hisashi cheating, and there were signs, so many, but until he looked her in the eye and admitted it she denied it until the end, she couldn't take that, couldn't think that, she couldn't. So, Inko worried about this Giran-san her son met at the park. It had been 2 months since her little boy had come sprinting into the apartment the day Hisashi called about not paying. Her little boy had been so happy, had been vibrating out of his shoes despite all the scrapes and dirt covering him. He'd sprinted into their apartment and told her, so happily, about the kind man he'd met who told him he was smart and that having a strong quirk didn't matter as long as you were smart. And Inko couldn't help but be relieved, couldn't help but hate herself for it either. Because the day Izuku met this Giran-san was the day he stopped talking about being a hero and instead started talking about analysis and information and spreadsheets. She loved her son, she wanted him to be happy, but Inko so very desperately needed him to be safe as well. Had to keep him safe, keep him close, so he wouldn't be taken from her. He was her little star, the thing her life revolved around now. If she didn't pull him close and hold on, he'd slip through her fingers and leave her behind. She couldn't leave him, couldn't pull herself away from anything she loved, but they could always leave her, they always left her in the end. From Izuku's babbling, she knew Giran-san was her age, maybe a little older. That he smoked cigarettes but never blew smoke near Izuku. That he liked to organize his paperwork in a quiet part of the park, and that he was most often there on weekends. Izuku would go on and on about how nice he was, how he reminded him of Masaru but a little meaner, that he didn't like people who were lazy or thought their quirk could fix everything. Inko had guessed, from her baby's babbling, that the man was most likely a lawyer of some sort, one that specialized in either divorces or restraining orders from how often Izuku talked about him mediating between hostile groups. Part of her was so very grateful for this Giran-san. He'd encouraged Izuku, inspired him, was teaching him about information and paperwork and safe career paths. And he was using Izuku's interest to do it. And she was really, truly grateful. But she was still worried. She just didn't want to be the reason Izuku lost his smile again. She didn't want to be the reason he left like everyone else. She would just have to hope for the best. She was doing a lot of hoping lately. Izuku lit up at the familiar sight of Giran's purple-suited form reclining on the familiar bench. Sprinting across the park with a breathless cry of greeting, Izuku nearly tripped over his own feet as Giran stood to meet him. The older man chuckled and caught his shoulders with the palms of his large hands, smirking down at Izuku as the boy beamed up at him. "Long time no see, kiddo," the man chuckled, blowing out a lungful of smoke. "Got a special lesson planned for ya?" Izuku straightened, eyes glittering brightly as he all but vibrated in front of the man, making Giran grin that familiar tiger smile as Izuku bounced on his toes. "You got one of those empty notebooks of yours?" "Of course." Izuku chirped gleefully, reaching over his head to pat at his bag. Giran grinned and jerked his head towards the bench, their bench, where a binder and some more thick packets of paper were sitting, much more paperwork than Giran had brought before. Izuku squeaked happily and dove for the bench, scrambling up and quickly setting his bag on the ground, pulling out a plain blue notebook and 2 pens, ready to start. "We've talked about your analysis shtick," Giran started the lesson, sitting down and throwing one arm over the back of the bench, settling one of his ankles on his knee as he flicked ash from his cigarette. "You're working on the organization and the ciphers and summarizing. That's all stuff you can do on your own, kiddo. Things you don't need me much for since you're smart enough to do it yourself." Izuku beamed, ears flushing pink at the unhesitating praise, and Giran reached over and gave his messy hair an affectionate ruffle. "So, now we're gonna work on stuff you do need me for. Least, till you get yourself settled." "What is it, Giran-san?" Izuku asked eagerly. The tiger smile flashed, teeth glinting in the sunlight as wisps of smoke curled from the gap in his smile. "Blackmail." Izuku blinked, hesitating even as he jotted the word down in the self-made code Giran had told him to start using to keep his information safe. Isn't that illegal?" Izuku asked meekly, uncertain, and Giran let out a lungful of smoke on a sigh, and turned slightly so his body was facing more towards Izuku. "Kiddo, the world ain't all heroes and villains and vigilantes," the man told him bluntly, firmly. "It's filled with assholes out there looking out for themselves and their own. Everyday people who want everyday things, grannies walking across the street, little lady pushin' a baby carriage, the random man running the register at the shitty internet cafe across town. All of every single one, just wants what's best for themselves or the people they give a shit about. And every single one has got secrets they don't want getting out. Maybe that granny has a son who's a villain, maybe that little lady is cheatin' on her boyfriend or the kid ain't her husband's, Maybe that cashier is sneaking some money on the side. Point is, everyone has got secrets, got weaknesses that others can exploit. Giran took a long drag off his cigarette as Izuku chewed on his lip uncertainly, hand jotting the information down rapidly in the shorthand pattern he'd come up with. You want to make it in the world, you've got to have 3 things, Giran reminded him calmly. Izuku bobbed his head firmly in acceptance. An asset, a clientele, and the willingness to do what it takes to keep both, Izuku stated, the mantra Giran had taught him since that first meeting, and beamed as it earned him another hair ruffle. Exactly so, Giran told him. Most people have one of 3 reasons for doing shit in this world, kiddo. Greed, love, and revenge, he stated, counting them off on his fingers as Izuku jotted them down. These are the reasons people do pretty much anything. They want more money because they want things, they do things to get more money, legal and illegal alike. They need money, 'cause a loved one needs it for whatever reason, or so they can keep a loved one close. They'll do whatever it takes to get that money, because love's got them by the ball. Someone fed them over, and now they want revenge? Money's the best way to do it, or at least, the best way to do it without a jail sentence. Taking one last drag before flicking the finished butt away, Giran popped his neck inside quietly as Izuku kept diligently writing. What's this have to do with, blackmail? Izuku asked tentatively. Giran hummed, obviously considering the way he would continue as he absently pulled out an unopened pack of cigarettes and began the process of packing them. It's like this, kiddo, he finally started. You get picked on at school, right? Izuku flinched and looked down at his notebook, fingers tightening on his pen, and Giran set a hand on his head briefly before continuing. You get picked on. The teachers see it, but they don't do shit because they're assholes. Izuku snorted, giggling even as his hands shot up to cover his mouth, and Giran winked at him even as he lifted a new cigarette to his mouth and lit it. Those same teachers would do whatever it takes to keep their jobs, 'cause it's easy and they get paid to not do shit, apparently. So here are the things we've got. You don't want to get beat up. Your teachers don't care if you get beat up. But they do care about their jobs. So, kiddo, how do you use this information to get what you want? Izuku bit his lip, looking away from Giran as he tried to organize his thought, tapping his fingertips on the notebook as he thought it through. I could, find something that would, he hesitated, took a deep breath, and made himself straighten up. I could find information or proof of stuff that would cost their jobs if it got out, he told Giran. And use that to make them stop the other kids from hurting me. Giran nodded firmly, a sly grin curling his lips. Just so, kiddo, he agreed. Although, you gotta remember, having a middleman is best for this, someone to be your face so you don't catch backlash, you know? Izuku nodded thoughtfully, absently noting that down even as he thought it over. So like instead of me telling the teachers that they need to do it or else, I could do it, anonymously? An email from a dummy account, like the one you taught me about last time? Izuku, technically, wasn't supposed to have an email beside the one his Kacha knew about, that he used to sign up for online games with. But Giran had shown him these things called incognito tabs and helped him set up an email through a weird thing called underweb, for if Izuku needed to ask Giran for something but couldn't wait for their meetups. Exactly that, Giran told him. Or, you could pretend that someone gave you the information to pass on, or you could make it a packet and slip it in their mail or under their door, though that one needs the layout for whatever cameras and security things your school has. When you get older, get some money to your name, you could pay other people to do your legwork, though that's shit for lazy assholes who trust too much, he muttered, flicking away some ash before he continued with the lesson. All that's for later shit though. Today, we're gonna go over a list of things to look for to find the sweet spots in a person's weaknesses. Then we're gonna go over a couple different techniques for gathering intel on a target without them finding out. Giran took a slow drag off his cigarette and offered Izuku that tiger smile. Hope you don't mind people watching, kiddo. We'll be doing it for a couple hours. Izuku lit up and shook his head, scrambling to his feet to follow along as Giran stood up, following after the older man eagerly as he led them back towards the more populated parts of town. Izuku may not be comfortable with the idea of blackmail, but it was like Giran said, people did things for love, greed, and revenge. And if Izuku had to blackmail a few people so his Kachin wouldn't be so worried, or so people wouldn't hurt him or other people as much, blackmail looked like the best option, since he couldn't fight people himself. Deku had been acting weird for ages. He hadn't tried to convince the class that he would be a hero despite being quirkless. He hadn't tried to follow Katsuki and the extras around in. Katsuki couldn't remember how long it had been since the nerd had followed him. It made something twist in his chest, something hurt, irritating that made him scowl. He didn't give a f what the nerd was doing, he didn't, why should he? But that didn't mean that the nerd could look down on him, ignoring him like, what, he was better than Katsuki? Scowling fiercely, small explosions popping like firecrackers in his palms in aggravation, Katsuki set out to hunt down the stupid nerd. He saw him, sometimes, from his room, running towards that one park they stopped playing at ages ago because of all the shady shit that went down there. Katsuki vaguely remembered some story about a body being found or some sheet, it didn't matter, but he knew that was where the shitty nerd ran off to every weekend like clockwork. He hadn't been noticing, hadn't been keeping an eye out, hadn't been worried that some creep was using Deku's stupid big brain for something, no, he just knew that Deku was too stupid to notice when someone was being a shady f-dash, that he'd probably take a drugged candy because he thought someone was being nice and Katsuki didn't care, but like hell he'd let the nerd put inko bacon through that. That was all. So Katsuki went looking for the nerd. He stomped down the cracked concrete, baring his teeth at anyone who looked at him funny, constantly letting little, angry pops out of his hands as he did so. And he'd barely reached the park when he spotted Deku, that stupid yellow backpack clashing with his stupid green hair as he bounced up and down like a stupid puppy about to get a treat. Katsuki opened his mouth to shout, to snap at the other boy, to get his attention, but found no sound coming out as a large hand suddenly landed on his head from nowhere. "You must be Kakin, huh, brat?" A drawling voice stated, something cold edging into it, something that made Katsuki freeze like a deer in the headlights, red eyes huge and mouth suddenly dry. Distantly, he noticed Deku disappearing into the distance, still hopping along like an excited puppy, and part of him wanted to cry out, wanted to get someone, anyone, to look over. No one would have, anyways. At this park, at this time of day? No one would have bothered looking even if Giran hadn't made it known that weekends were off limits at the park when he was in town. Hadn't made a point to give the local gangs and dealers some friendly advice that had them avoiding the little green-haired boy who'd taken to wandering around. And they had spread the word that the information broker had taken in a stray, the tiger had a little lamb, and he was willing to give out free information to the enemies of anyone who threatened that brat. But even without Giran cutting out the tiny park as his territory, no one would have helped the blonde boy. After all, it was every man for themselves. That was reality. "Let's have a chat, brat," the man drawled, a low cold rumble that made Katsuki's body feel like someone had just dropped ice water over him. Katsuki wouldn't remember exactly what happened, wouldn't remember the man's name or what he looked like, just that he was terrifying. The memories were muddled, blurry and vague and full of holes, probably the man's quirk, but that didn't matter. He remembered the gist of it. Stay away from Midoriya Izuku. Katsuki was going to be a hero, gonna be the best. He wasn't stupid, but he knew there was nothing he could do about this man. He would stay away from Deku, sure, but he'd keep watching. And when he became a hero, when he could kick everyone's butt and beat them all no matter what, he'd find the man again and kick his butt. But, for now, he'd stay away from stupid Deku, but keep his eyes peeled. Man or not, fear of him or not, he couldn't let anything really bad happen to the nerd. Inko Bacon didn't deserve more sheet to go wrong. Blowing an absent smoke ring as he watched the bratty sheet of a kid stagger dazedly away from him, tears still smudged on his face from their little chat, Giran tossed his cigarette off to the side and pulled out a new one. He wasn't a nice guy. He'd sold information for money, dealt with the scum of the earth, helped plan his fair share of murders and killed and crippled his fair share of competitors. He wasn't one for connections, and those he had tended to be purely business. And for the right price or the right line crossed, even those could be cut. But when he did make a connection, when he let a sliver of his little black heart claim someone, they were his. And he'd done worse than just scaring a shitty brat for less. And it was only because the brat was a brat that had kept him from cutting off some of his shitty little fingers. He'd seen the burns and scars on the kiddo's shoulders and arms, had seen evidence of the hidden injuries in person, and had found more than enough evidence that the brat had done more and worse in the past. And that was unacceptable. Giran wasn't one for connections. They were exploitable weaknesses, and he made his pay using those against other people. But Giran was also Okuda Kajiro. And Kajiro was once, and would always be, a greedy little street rat who clung to his things with a viciousness that would bite off the fingers of anyone stupid enough to try and take them. There was a reason his mother lived in luxury until her death. Why his little sister had gotten into the college she wanted without having to spend a dime, had gotten a good house in a safe neighborhood that was patrolled by a certain type of both hero and criminal. Why his dear old daddy had died writhing in filth and agony as soon as he tracked the sheet stain down. Midoriya Izuku was one of his now. And Giran wasn't gonna let some snot-nosed sheet continue to bully his kiddo. The rest of the little sheets and the dumbfucks who claimed to be teachers were the kiddos to play with, but Giran had done his research. He knew his kiddo wouldn't be able to bring himself to use what Giran was teaching him against the brat who could have been his brother, if he wasn't such an insufferable little shit stain. Kiddo was still learning, still using his little kitten claws to paw at people, only occasionally digging in and drawing blood, and that was fine. Giran was there to help him take the bigger prey down, after all. Just until he was big enough to do it himself. He didn't mind. Pulling out his phone, fingers flitting over the bunny-eared case the kiddo had gotten him during their last meeting, Giran lit another cigarette and started heading towards the no doubt eagerly waiting little Sprague, checking his notifications as he did so. He had a new spot to take the kiddo people watching after all, and if he got to slip in a drop-off at the same time, well, that's just good for business. And if, across the seas, one formerly Midoriya, Mamoto Hisashi, had found himself plagued with an unfortunate string of bad luck, the target of multiple muggings and beatdowns and unemployed, well, Giran had a thing against deadbeat dads after all. Tiger, burning bright. The first time Izuku blackmails someone, it's not for himself. Giran had been teaching him about it for months by then, taking him people watching, showing him how to recognize when someone was hiding something from those around them, when they weren't trying, when someone was watching someone else for the same reason they were. Izuku was a good student, he listened, took notes, absorbed everything the kind man had been teaching him, but he hadn't been able to put into practice anything that they'd gone over, something in his chest going tight at the idea. But then he saw Ayano-chan come in with bruises on her arm too big to be made by other kids, and something in him, the thing that had been growing with every lesson with Giran, had sat up and started watching. Oishi Ayano. Quirk, color change. The ability to change the color of anything she touched if it stayed within a 1 meter distance of her. Required all 5 fingers. Couldn't change into more than one color. Couldn't change patterns but could change the colors in a pattern. Allergic to strawberries, favorite color plum purple, favorite animal butterflies. Mother, Oishi Ayam, a model, currently out of country. Quirk, hair color. Ability to change her own hair color for 1 hour. Cannot change color again until hour is up. Generally pleasant, but dismissive and distant. Prefers to interact with daughter via expensive gifts. Father, Oishi Akio. Stay-at-home dad. Website designer. Quirk, brightness adjuster. Ability to make colors brighter or darker. 5-finger contact required. Cannot change the brightness or darkness of multiple things at once. Must be touching target for 10 seconds to activate and can change the level of brightness if within 2 meters of item. Alcoholic. Izuku watched. He watched and he listened and he gathered intel. And within a week he had learned enough. There was just one last thing to check, one last bit of information he needed, and then he could get to work. Pulling out his phone, Izuku messaged Giran. Giran had just finished selling off a shipment of illegal support items and some bare-bones blueprints, when his phone chimed a particular way, making him pause immediately from where he'd been moving to light a cigarette, eyebrow arching. He finished lighting his smoke and pulled his phone out to check, ignoring the curious look from his customer. He made a point of avoiding talking with different customers while in the middle of a big deal, something Rokuro as a repeat customer and client, knew well. Kiddo, you don't happen to work with an Oishi Akio, do you? Now both brows raising, Giran did a quick name search through his collection. Rokuro was looking even more curious, an unfortunate side effect of being an inventor. Gold eyes glowing faintly as he tried to peer at Giran's phone using his quirk. Examine, the lavender-haired man pouted as he realized he couldn't see past Giran's pointedly placed hand. It's like you don't even know me at all, Rokuro, Giran drawled, smirking at the man, and blowing a mouthful of smoke at him. The inventor pouted even more, gold eyes gleaming cat-bright through the smoke. He didn't even bother to brush away. He dealt with enough explosions and chemicals that a little cigarette smoke wasn't going to bother him much. Chuckling lowly as the inventor huffed and flounced off to observe the movement of his new ill-gotten goods, Giran responded to the text. Me, not that I know of, kiddo. Worked with an Oishi I am a time or two, for some DLVI purposes, but not an Akio. Kiddo, that's his wife. Giran's brows furrowed a little, flicking ash from his cigarette as he considered for a moment. Me, this a-hole giving you sheet or something, kiddo? Need me to have a talk with him? Kiddo, oh no, not me. I just wanted to make sure I wouldn't be upsetting you if I destroyed him. Startled into laughing, Giran grinned with dark amusement as he hit the call button. Listening to it ring once before his kiddo answered. I wasn't gonna go through with my idea if he was a client, Giran-san, I promise. His kiddo declared immediately, sheepishly earnest even over the phone. I would have run it by you first. Calm down, kiddo, he ordered easily, knowing his amusement was clearly hurt if the sheepish, but clearly relieved, giggle that answered told him. So, what did this Oishi Akio do that made you wanna go after him, eh? He's abusing his daughter, his kiddo told him, the usually bright, happy voice going soft and angry, almost hissing over the phone, and Giran's eyes went half-lidded as he took a slow, deep hit from his cigarette. She's in my class, really quiet but smart. She wants to design hero clothes when she's older. And he's hurting her for fun, Giran-san. He's a bully. And that was more than enough of a reason for the kiddo, he mused darkly, putting out his cigarette despite it not being even halfway done. Can't use that big brain to defend himself, but sure as hell ready to burn the world down for others. All right, kiddo, he drawled, already making a note to clear his schedule for a few days, however long the kiddo needed him. Tell me the plan. Maybe I know a few people willin' to help out. Thank you, Giran-san, the kiddo chirped, sounding so relieved and happy, and Giran couldn't help the grin that curled his lips, even as Rokuro stared at him with glittering gold eyes and a fascinated, delighted expression from across the room. No problem, kiddo, Giran replied. Now, hit me with it. And after taking a deep breath, his kiddo launched into what was probably one of the most beautifully petty, spiteful little plots Giran had ever had the pleasure of hearing. The grin that had curled his lips widened, a teeth-baring smile that was the furthest thing from friendly. Well done, kiddo. I've got the perfect person in mind to help out. I'll take you to meet them tomorrow. See you then, Giran-san. But bye. See ya then, kiddo, he chuckled before hanging up slowly. Giran slid his phone away, before throwing his head back and laughing. The little kitten was getting his first taste of blood, and Giran couldn't be prouder. I'll see you around, Rokuro, Giran laughed, lifting a hand to wave once at the wildly grinning inventor. I've got places to be and favors to call in. Still chuckling, Giran pulled up a specific number in his phone, sending them a simple message with a time and place. It was the parent's job to guide the child. To teach them, help them, protect them, until they could do so themselves for themselves, and even then, the parent would always be watching, ready to catch them when they stumbled. The cub was stretching his paws, testing his claws against his first prey, eagerly attempting his first hunt, and the tiger would be there with him the entire time, ready to cripple the prey so the cub could strike the final blow. The tiger would be there, hiding in the shadows, until the cub learned to hide too, and even then he would remain, a darker shadow amongst many, ready to step forward and rip into any threat that the cub couldn't face alone. For now, the tiger would follow the cub's stumbling first steps into the field, fangs barred in a smile. And, unknowing, the prey trembled. Izuku all but flung himself into Giran-san's car when the man came to pick him up from the park, vibrating with anxious energy as he bounced into the seat. The car was nice, not brand new super fancy, nice but clean and without rust or dents. It was a dark, navy purple color and the windows were super dark as well. The inside was made up of pale gray leather and carpet, and Giran sent him a smirk from the driver's seat. "Buckle up, kiddo," the man drawled as he flicked his cigarette out the window. "We're gonna be on the road for about 30 minutes. Okay," Izuku chirped, dumping his bag into the seat next to him as he buckled himself into the middle seat so he could lean forward towards Giran-san more. "Did you have a nice trip to Hokkaido?" "I did," Giran replied easily as they started driving. "I made a lot of money and worked with a guy I've done business with several times before. He works with support gear, you know, and helps lots of people who aren't heroes get things that help them out in their everyday life." "That's so cool, Giran-san," Izuku chirped, beaming brightly as Giran glanced at him with the rearview mirror. "Did you know that there are 18 different lawsuits going on right now about people using support gear? 7 of them are because someone used stolen stuff, but the rest are all people who are being, accused of using illegal support items, but a lot aren't that at all." "Oh really?" Giran replied. Izuku bobbed his head quickly, bouncing in place. "Yeah. One of them is about this lady in, Hosu. She has a quirk that means she has perfect nighttime and UV vision. But, it means she can't see in regular lighting? Like natural or artificial. And so, she got this visor thing? It covers the whole top half of her head, but it protects her eyes from getting hurt. But she's being accused of using illegal support item, 'cause it's not a prescribed tool from her doctor." "And what do you think about it, kiddo?" Giran asked. Izuku smiled brightly at him. This was one of the reasons he loved talking with Giran, about anything and everything. Giran listened to what he was talking about, and then he always asked Izuku what he thought about it. And then he'd tell Izuku what he thought about it, and then they'd discuss it. Like grown-ups. He never told Izuku to shut up, stop mumbling, don't talk about stupid things. He never scolded Izuku for being distracting or oversharing. He never just hummed and nodded and said, "That's nice, dear," or anything like that. Giran treated Izuku like his opinion, his thoughts, like he mattered, and Izuku would never forget that. "I don't see why she should have to use subpar protective gear when she's got a perfectly good set already." Izuku informed the older man sincerely. "She got the visor from a friend as a gift. And, according to the laws revolving around hero support gear, it's only illegal if she bought the visor. The visor was a patented, hero-specific or hero-geared item, or if it was stolen from a support company or hero. Therefore, legally, they can't make her stop using it or fine her for it. And her lawyers, been talking about those things as well, but the other lawyer? The one that's against her. The prosecutor?" Giran offered. Izuku beamed. "Yes. Thank you, I couldn't remember, I kept thinking persecutor." Giran chuckled lowly and lit a new cigarette. "Same thing with different connotations, kiddo, but keep going." Izuku shrugged but bobbed his head happily enough. "Right. So, the prosecutor, he's been, constantly bringing up the fact that the lady has marks on her record for past public quirk use. Her quirk is literally unable to be turned off, Giran-san. Of course she's gonna have issues with public quirk use when getting the license for that, or even a medical card, are really expensive and, since her quirk doesn't affect other people then it doesn't meet a lot of the requirements for those, anyways. But he's such a J-arc, Giran-san, and he keeps making it sound like she's some kind of vigilante or villain or something. And she just wants to see in the daytime." Izuku huffed, crossing his arms over his chest. "That's the way a lot of people are, kiddo," Giran reminded easily. "A lot of people out there got things against other people, especially against certain kinds of quirks. You know how that is, kiddo." Izuku slumped, looking out the window with a frustrated frown. "Yeah," he muttered. "I know." They sat in silence for a moment, Giran blowing a lungful of smoke out the window with a low sigh. Izuku shook his head, fingers tightening into fists on his thighs as he made himself straighten back up. Giran-san didn't slouch unless he wanted to irritate someone, so Izuku was trying not to slouch either. "She's gonna win the case, I think," the boy declared firmly, continuing past the bitterness that had risen up in his throat. Her visor was a gift from a friend, so no money exchanged hands, and the most she had to do with its creation is let her friend have a pair of her broken, old prescription sunglasses. The visor was also not a patented design the friend was gonna sell. It was a prototype that has since been discarded because the prescription needed for the glass, made the metal surrounding it too brittle. So, since no money was made to get it or to create it, and it wasn't a type of support gear, the prosecutor can't charge her for owning and using it. Izuku frowned, brows furrowing as he tried to remember. A loophole, kiddo, Giran stated, sending him a flicker of that smile smirk of his as he did. Something that people like me use to keep assholes from taking our sheet from us. Izuku nodded, grinning back as he bounced in the seat. Exactly. A loophole. Izuku agreed happily. Like me. Oh. Giran asked. Izuku bobbed his head. I looked up what laws there were about quirkless people, 'cause I wanted to know what support laws there were for the news story. And then I got curious, 'cause there's this one clause in the law about business use of certain items, where it specified that the allowable items couldn't be quirk-specific, and that they could only be used in non-quirk-related ways. Like, you couldn't have a safe that only locked if you had an electricity quirk, but you could have a safe that you could charge with an electricity quirk, as long as it only locked without a quirk at all. I know a guy with a safe like that, Giran mused. Izuku bobbed his head, even as he reached into his backpack, scrambling around for his yellow notebook. Well, I got to looking for quirkless-specific laws. And did you know, Giran-san, that there are so many laws for quirks, but only like 5 for quirkless people like me? No, kiddo, no I didn't, Giran hummed, sounding genuinely thoughtful. Which ones matter, then? Izuku hummed, flipping open his yellow notebook and rapidly turning the pages until he was about midway through the book, the coded words staring back at him as his eyes darted over the words. Well, there's the really old Quirkless Protection Act that means that anyone who hurts or discriminates against me, especially those who use their quirks illegally on me, get a guaranteed 3-year prison sentence and, for lesser cases get really, really heavily fined, he said, tapping the page. And there are, like, a bunch of different clauses in it, 'cause it was from, like, 200 years ago? And it's super mean to use nowadays, Giran-san, but if I wanted, I could use it and send everyone at my school who hurt me, or watched others hurt me and did nothing, I could send them all to prison and ruin my classmates' futures. If I wanted to, I could do it, Giran-san. That's a good thing to know, kiddo, Giran informed him simply, easily approving, and Izuku let out a soft breath, weirdly relieved and wondering why he should be. This was Giran-san after all. If anyone would understand the way Izuku felt about having such an ace up his sleeve, it was Giran-san. Having something like that up your sleeve is important, kiddo. Just make sure that you don't use it too often, or too loudly, and let the threat of it do the work for you. After all, people are more likely to listen to threats or blackmail when it's credible and backed up with facts. Izuku dutifully finished. Giran snapped his fingers and sent Izuku a small grin. Exactly, kiddo. Giran wasn't a fan of bluffing, although he could if he wanted to or the situation called for it, and had taught Izuku instead the art of misdirection and half-truths. Izuku liked those lessons. They meant that when his Kachin asked about Giran-san and what he was teaching Izuku, he didn't have to lie. He hated lying, hated it. Everyone was always lying to him about something about himself. They were constantly doing it. His Kachin lied when she told him she was okay, when she acted like everything was fine, when she told him touch and no. Hisashi was just working hard and that's why he never called anymore or sent money. The teachers lied when they told him his homework was wrong or not good enough or that they didn't see it when the others hurt him. His classmates lied when they got seen hurting him or when they did something stupid or bad and blamed it on him. Everyone he knew lied to him, but Giran didn't. Giran looked him in the eye and told him that he was smart and clever and that it would be hard for him to get a good job without a quirk but that he could still work, that he was so much more than just stupid, worthless Deku, and then he'd offered his hand. And Izuku adored him for it. The other laws are just about what I can or can't do, Izuku continued, getting back on the subject of quirkless laws with a fluttering happiness in his belly that made him smile brightly as he tapped his notebook. I can't join the military, I can't run for any high-level political positions, I can't work at any prison or in certain hospital wards that deal with dangerous or unstable quirks or people, and he swallowed, the old remnants of his recently discarded dream fragmenting further. I can't take any hero courses. I could still apply for a hero school, but I couldn't. Can't be a hero. Izuku felt the first few tears fall, but he managed to scrub them away before they could drip into his book. Giran was quiet for a long moment, before suddenly the car was stopping, and he was turning in his seat, putting his cigarette out and looking at Izuku with a serious expression. That's effing bullshit, kid, the older man stated bluntly, firmly. And it fings. It's bullshit, and I know you wanted to be a hero, and I'm sorry that some brown-nosed quirkist assholes with more money than brains took that from you. He reached forward, awkward thanks to the way he was twisted, but set his large hand on Izuku's head, ruffling his curly hair gently, a heavy, comforting weight that Izuku leaned into without hesitation even as he sobbed and covered his face. You've got a good heart and a hell of a good head on your shoulders, kiddo. I know you would have been one of the good ones, the heroes who don't do shit for money and fame. You'd made one bullshit underground hero, let me tell you, he snorted, and Izuku couldn't help the weak, hiccuping giggle that escaped him. It would have been a fucking nightmare trying to work around you, kiddo, I can tell. Dodged a fucking tank instead of a bullet, you get me? Izuku's giggles picked up, tears slowing, as Giran groaned dramatically before chuckling, that heavy, comforting hand smoothing his hair back from his forehead. But hey, just think of it this way, kiddo, the older man said, pulling back and smirking at Izuku as the boy peered up at him, sniffling quietly. You're about to help save a little girl from a mean jackass. That makes ya a hero in my books, even if other people would say it's more vigilantism. A hero's a hero. They just come with different definitions for different people. Izuku's eyes went wide, staring up at the man who'd been teaching him with wonder. Different definitions. Of hero, Izuku thought, almost reverent, and slowly, a smile curled Izuku's mouth, not wide and bright and happy like usual, and not his tiger smile, but something soft and warm and oh so grateful. And Giran offered him a fond smile smirk, hands still on his head, and chuckled quietly. Let's get going, kiddo, the older man chuckled, patting Izuku's head one last time before turning back to face the front again, restarting the car as Izuku wiped the remains of tears from his face, only then really realizing that Giran had pulled the car over completely so he could talk to Izuku face to face. That light, warm fluttering in his belly was back, filling his whole chest and making Izuku smile quietly as he stared out the window. After a few minutes of silence, Izuku spoke up again, still staring out the window. You know, Giran-san, that according to the vigilante laws, I couldn't be charged with vigilantism? Oh, yeah. It's 'cause the law states that you have to use a quirk to commit vigilantism. Which is, really. Kure Michi was a hacker. With a quirk like Data Shot, which let him literally shoot his consciousness through any firewall for a 5-minute PRD, it was practically a guarantee that he'd excel. But, just because he could get through any firewall, didn't mean that people didn't have protections beyond that, and Michi had been young and stupid and arrogant. And now, he owed Giran too dimmin much to not come when he called. Do as you're told, don't ask questions, you'll be fine, he reminded himself as he waited nervously for the broker to arrive, fingers tapping nervously on his laptop as he sat, his usual guard for this sheet, Gina, standing boredly behind him, leaned against the wall with her metallic silver hair, actual metal, glittering under the artificial lights of the warehouse. Giran had given him a time and a place to be, and Michi was there, but now he was getting nervous. The broker was late, 10 minutes late, in fact, and the hacker could count on one hand the number of times that had happened. Well, on one of his hands. Shuddering slightly as he caught sight of the stubs on his left hand where he'd once had fingers, Michi looked away. They were constant reminders that, just because he could didn't mean he should. Giran had been responsible for one of the missing 3 fingers, the first one, in fact. The next one, the broker had watched on as it was cut off by an angry client of his that Michi had hacked for a competitor without knowing. And the third, Giran had held him down as another angry client with a weak puppeteer Quirk had mad him cut it off himself. All of that could have been avoided if you just kept your head down and Quirk to yourself, he reminded himself firmly, skittishly, as he dragged his mangled hand through his hair. If he had sworn off hacking after the first finger, then Giran wouldn't practically own him now. After all, Giran had known what his Quirk shots looked like, since he'd seen it firsthand on his own computer. The broker had been the one to hunt him down for those other clients, had been the one to help catch him and pin him down. And it had been the broker who'd kept them from just killing him. But 3 strikes and you're out, as the saying goes, and Giran had warned him, while he was still sobbing over his third lost finger and curled into a ball in the puddle of his own vomit and pieces, that if he tried to hack anyone else without Giran's say-so, it wouldn't be a finger that would get cut off. That had been 3 years ago, and Michi had shown up to every single address that was texted to him, on time and with the guard who almost always appeared within the hour of receiving orders. And the worst thing was Giran was paying him for all this, was providing a steady income, better than he'd been making taking hacking jobs before even. And every time Michi got that ominous text message, that yawning pit of terror and anxiety would open in his chest and gut, but so would the biting edge of interest, of curiosity. Because Michi wanted to know. He needed to know more about things. It was why he tried hacking the broker. Why he loved hacking altogether. And yeah, he found some pretty effed up things sometimes, but they were things he knew now. And the not knowing would feed his anxiety, building and building and building, until he had to look. A mental price due to his Quirk counselor explained when he was a kid. His Quirk was meant for gathering information, the harder to find the better, and, as a result, his brain believed that it had to have that information. And that, without it, he'd be hurt or die or get sick, whichever paranoid thought would work to get him what he needed. Giran somehow had a way of knowing when Michi was just a step away from thinking what's another lost finger? Somehow, someway, the broker just knew, and that's why Michi was here. The door to the warehouse opened, and as if summoned, in walked Giran, an ominous cloud of cigarette smoke and purple-on-silver cloth. That gap-toothed smug as if smirk, those stupid glasses covering what Michi knew were pink eyes, and one of those hard, cruel hands tousling through his hair. And a small child standing next to him, beaming like the broker hung the moon and promised him every all-might toy in existence. What the F-dash? Michi wondered, a step away from hysteric and dumbfounded mixed together, as the broker walked towards his little setup with an actual FNG child. What the F-dash? Michi, my guy, my favorite little computer virus, Giran greeted slyly, smugly, an oozing coo of mocking cruelty as he smiled, teeth bared and gleaming with wisps of smoke curling. Always good to see ya. Hope you're ready to work. My kiddo here has something fantastic planned, you know, and I just knew you'd be the best person to help him see his first big plan put into motion. And the kid, the literal FNG child, looked up at Michi, smile fading as something calculating flashed through those big green eyes, and then the little monster smiled. And the hair on the back of Michi's neck stood up, and his mangled hand ached as phantom pains where his fingers used to be kicked up. Oh my effing god, he bred, Michi thought, horror and revulsion and terror curdling through him as Giran's smile, the one he'd worn after cutting off Michi's finger, after clapping him on the shoulder as he sobbingly signed his life and FNG soul away to the broker, that same FNG smile, rested on the round little face of this green-haired child and just, happy to help, sir. Michi managed, voice warbling and cracking with fear as 2 of those smiles came his way. Vaguely, behind him, leaning against the wall, he missed Gina choking on her own spit as she stared between her boss and the kid. But it wasn't like he was any better. Great, Giran declared, clapping a hand on the child's shoulder. Let's go with Kachi. I know you'll do your best to help him out. And, under his traumatized gaze, Michi watched the kid once again turn that wondering, adoring smile up at his boss, and bit back an edge of hysteria. What can I do to help, Keikachi-san? Michi warbled, drawing the kid's attention to him, and once again, those big green eyes glittered up at him calculatingly as that smile returned. We're gonna destroy a child abuser's life, Michi-san, the boy told him cheerfully, teeth bared, and green eyes narrowed and glittering like poison in sunlight, and Michi's mouth went dry. All you gotta do is help me get some information, place a few emails, and send a few videos to a few people. No worries, I've got most of it right here, he added, pulling a binder and a couple flash drives out of his bright yellow backpack, and Michi accepted them numbly when offered, legs weak as he slowly sat at the makeshift desk provided. The child moved forward, away from Giran, and came around the desk to smile up at Michi, and Michi felt the hairs on his neck rise again as his eyes darted to Giran. Giran, whose eyes were cold behind a haze of smoke in those glasses, and locked on him like a predator. Let's get to work then, Kachi-san, Michi managed. The child beamed, innocent sunshine and sweetness despite the blood that would no doubt cover him one day. Michi's missing fingers ached. Let's. The cub chirped, and across the desk, the tiger smiled. Within hours, Oishi Akio's whole life went down in flames. His every dirty secret was aired to the internet at large. Every site he'd worked on in the last 20 years was plagued with videos and images of him abusing his daughter, and email upon email of information containing the heavy embezzlement he'd been involved with, the proof he was using the websites he made to steal from clients, the texts between him and his drag dealer made public knowledge. His affair with the neighbor exposed as well. He was arrested on multiple accounts, ironclad proof collected, his funds frozen, and no lawyer but the greenest, fresh-faced baby straight from law school available for his defense. His wife returned immediately from her show, divorce papers in hand and the wrath of God on her side. Aya may have difficulties connecting to her daughter, but it had nothing to do with lack of love. That she was gifted a surprisingly hefty amount of money for recompense was important to no one. Giran took care of his people, after all, and Izuku took care of other bullied children. And if money exchanged hands, if whispers were spread through the prison community about the child abuser, well, it surprised no one when he eventually ended up dead in his cell with no witnesses and no nearby guards having heard a thing. Prison had its own set of rules after all. And Giran had a type when it came to murder. That's all there was to it. Tiger, burning bright. After Oishi Akio, it was like a mental block had been lifted in Izuku's mind. Suddenly he found it so much easier to meet people's eyes, to stare his bullies down, to answer when called on by mean-spirited teachers. He found himself casually mentioning things he'd noticed about the other kids and the teachers alike, when they started picking on him, things that made them back off or leave him alone. Like how interesting it was that Kibakuin's math grades had gone up, but only when he had his purple water bottle, the one with the loose label on it. How funny it was that Takata-sensei went to the same park he did on weekends, and how he thought the lady he met there was really pretty, although she didn't look like the picture he had on his desk of his wife. How nice it was for Cho-chan to help Rin-chan with her homework. Their handwriting even looked the same. Isn't that funny? The little comments, the pointedly not pointed words, the use of his carefully practiced tiger smile, they worked wonders. Izuku had never felt so relaxed at school, not since he was diagnosed as quirkless. People avoided looking at him now, and when they did, he just had to smile, and they looked away. It was like suddenly he was dangerous, and they knew. Izuku wondered if he should feel guilty for the weird sense of power it gave him, knowing he made those around him nervous now. The burning hot anger and bitterness in his chest that hurt to think about, writhed and hissed as they lashed out, as he made people stop hurting him for once. He wasn't worthless, he was Kachi, and he could ruin them, and it felt so good to not be hurt, to let some of the anger out, to get to breathe for once without being attacked. No, he wouldn't feel guilty, he decided as he smiled at Tsubasa-kun when the winged boy glared at him, watching as the boy flinched and looked away uncomfortably. Izuku continued to stare at him, smiling his tiger smile, when the boy glanced back, making him flinch again and hunch his shoulders defensively. Only then did Izuku look away. The first time he'd done that, he'd felt like a bully, and had tried to pull back, but the actual bullies had taken that as an excuse. Had tried to hurt him, to teach him his place, and Izuku had gotten so angry. He couldn't remember all that he said, all that he hissed at Tanaka-kun and Ito-kun and Reiko-chan when they'd been trying to hurt him at recess, but he knew it was mean, was enough that they'd fled, that Reiko-chan had cried, and that none of them would come near him for a week. He didn't want to hurt people like that, to just Just lash out and not know what he was saying, not know when it was too much instead of just enough. Giran-san said that controlling your emotions was important, knowing when to let it out and when to hold it in, 'cause you could do too much damage if you weren't careful, and damaged goods were bad for business. So, Izuku let that angry, hurting thing in his chest out in little pieces. He let the words and smiles and eye contact lash out, like little kitten scratches instead of stab wounds. And even though he was using Giran-san's lessons now, even though he felt better about being able to make the bullies just leave him alone, there was something in his chest that just got more angry. As time went on and they kept leaving him alone. Why did he have to do this to get them to stop hurting him? Why couldn't they just be nice? Why did they have to make him be mean just to get some peace? What did he do? Why were they like this? Izuku was getting used to having to be a little mean to get what he wanted, and he wasn't sure if that made him a good person anymore. He wasn't sure he cared anymore. Word spread quickly through the underground. From underling to grunt to expendable workers. All the little mice working beneath the rats, beneath the predators, the ones who had dug too deep and now had to tread water under generous employers just to keep afloat, the ones who couldn't back out because someone or something else now held their leashes. The broker had an heir. And from the bottom of the ladder, the rumors began to climb. Giran was in the middle of a before-bed drink when his phone rang. A glance at the caller ID had him arching a brow before he answered it with a flick of his thumb and a pointedly sleazy smile. "Amanda, my delightfully vicious flower, how can I help you this fine evening?" "Cut the sheet, Giran," the American stated, pretty voice sharp and irritated. "I want answers." Giran continued smiling, eyeing his sake with amusement. "Now, you know I'm always happy to help a friend out, Amanda," he replied easily. "For the right price, I'm willing to do all sorts of things." "Shut the F up, you perv," Amanda snapped. "Why the F are you moving in my territory?" Giran paused to consider, lifting his drink to sip. "Ah, this is about Yamato Hisashi," he said, playful sleaziness leaving his voice immediately. "Yeah, it's about you using your people in my territory to F with someone in my territory," Amanda snarled irritably. "You know the rules, Giran, and unless you're trying to move in on my space, you get your people the F out of it." Giran paused, nostrils flaring and a sneer curling his lips. "It's not business, Amanda," he told her. The woman snorted out an ugly laugh. "Business is the only thing you do, Giran," she snapped back. Giran drank the rest of his sake like a shot, good mood already leaving, cold gaze locking on muted TV across from him, unseeing as he concentrated on the call. "Not this time, Amanda. This is personal, and you know personal outranks business in some cases." Giran's American counterpart scoffed in disbelief, but already, the tone of her voice had shifted slightly. They'd known one another for years now, and in that time Giran had only claimed something personal 3 times. It wasn't something he took lightly, and she knew that. Did this schmuck dude piss you off, then?" she demanded, aggression already calming down. "I did a background check when I spotted your mooks beating the sheet out of him for the 3rd time. He's a regular 9-to-5 dumbfuck, Giran. Worst thing he's done is F around on his girlfriend and be late on his child support." Giran pulled out a cigarette and lit up, taking a slow, deliberate drag as he considered for a moment, before saying F it. She'd find out sooner than later if her people were worth anything. Might as well control the information itself. "He F'd over my kiddo and his ma, Amanda," he stated coldly, voice mild, silk over steel. "Well F dash," Amanda replied, voice shocked and genuinely surprised, and Giran felt a cold smile curl his lips. Rare was a woman with a premonition. Quirk surprised. He was rather proud to say that he was the cause of at least 4 of those surprises now. Why the F is he still alive then? It's an honest question, considering this is the woman who witnessed what he did to the fucker who mugged his little sister when she was visiting America for spring break when she was 19. Giran took another drag from his cigarette and hummed lowly, breathing the smoke from his nostrils as he considered his empty sake cup. He wasn't big on alcohol, not with the memories of his dear old daddy in his head, but he was considering another cup. "Figured I'd give him time to, ruminate on his sins," he chuckled lowly meanly, as he bared his teeth at no one. Maybe I'll ask Kiddo what he wants done with him. In a couple months. Maybe. Amanda laughed, then, all previous ire forgiven. If there was anything the woman loved besides money and power, it was good old-fashioned revenge, the pettier the better. Well, of me sideways. Who would have thought you of all people would be a parent? Amanda laughed, the subject sliding away from the target now that she'd been reassured that he wasn't moving in on her territory. What kind of woman would wanna F an a-hole like you, anyways? What did you do, pay her? Giran snorted, rolling his eyes. Hey now, I may be an ugly sumbitch but I ain't desperate, he chided playfully, the sleazy smile a comfortable response. I'd be more than happy to give you a demonstration next time you're in town, Amanda. The American snorted indelicately, clearly amused. We both know you'd lose your D if you brought it anywhere near me, Giran, she stated dryly. Giran chuckled. I'm gonna hang up now before you get any stupider. Congratulations on the brat, you sack of sheet. You say the sweetest things, babe, he drawled back, earning another of those snorts before she hung up. Humming lowly in amusement, relaxing back into his chair, Giran finished his cigarette as he absently watched the screen, thinking over the conversation. Wondering when telling people about his kiddo became talking about his son. When it didn't even ring as an excuse anymore to keep the kiddo out of trouble. To keep the scumbags he dealt with from even looking in the kid's direction, let alone thinking they could use him for whatever pathetic plans they thought were clever. Letting out a low chuckle, Giran stubbed out his cigarette and heaved himself to his feet, turning off the TV and heading to bed. He had a meeting in the morning, after all, and the kiddo expecting him in the afternoon. Shutting off all the lights as he went, Giran settled in for a good night's sleep, allowing his thoughts to fade out into his usual, barely remembered dreams peacefully. He'd wondered, as a kid, if the reason his dreams were never clear had to do with his quirk. Sometimes, he had clear snippets of conversations where he'd used it, after all, and the dreams were muddied enough to work. Now, he didn't much care. It meant he never had to worry over nightmares and could answer honestly that he slept like a baby whenever those naive idiots demanded, how could he sleep at night? Giran's dreams were the most peaceful part of his life, sometimes, and he was grateful for that. Giran went to bed with full intentions of a good 8 hours of sleep. He was woken after barely 3 by a phone call, and upon answering, rose with full intentions of murder. Kajiro Okuta? This nurse Shiba Haruko from Mizudafu General Hospital. Midoriya Izuku was just admitted with smoke inhalation, second-degree burns, and a broken arm after a house fire, and has you listed as one of his emergency contacts. Someone was about to die slowly. The tiger bared both teeth and claws as the hunt began. Someone had hurt his cub, and that someone would regret everything. These was no mercy, no leniency, no forgiveness. No excuse or explanation would save his prey. Only death would be the end of their suffering. And death would take a long, long time to come. Izuku coughed as quietly as he could, miserable as he curled up in his too big-seeming hospital bed, well, as much as he could with the big, heavy cast on his right arm. He didn't really know what had happened. He'd been sleeping, been warm and comfy curled up in his bed, when there was a sound, broken glass, and something wet-sounding, he remembered. It had woken him up, those sounds, before the roar of the fire had made the apartment light up so bright. Kachin had shouted, had tried to get them both out safely, but in the end, the fire had filled the whole front of the apartment, fast and bright and hungry, following the spatter of something liquid and oily-looking, sizzling and popping and leaving little painful starburst all over Izuku's arms and bared legs, like when Kakin used to have bad days. Izuku had barely managed to grab the flash drives that had his note in them before he and his Kachin had gone out his window. Kachin had broken most of his fall, but his arm had hit the ground hard and had hurt so bad that he'd blacked out. His neck hurt too, probably whiplash from the fall, and his whole body ached like one big bruise and he couldn't stop coughing and the nurses said Kachin was hurt, pretty badly from what he'd overheard. She'd landed badly, trying to keep him safe, had hurt something in her back and head, and broken her collarbone and some ribs. She was in a coma, a medical one, to keep her from moving while they did the surgeries she needed, but Izuku just wanted her to be okay. They weren't as close as they'd been before he'd met Giran-san, going on 2 years ago now. But he knew his Kachin loved him, was happy for him, even if she couldn't quite manage to be happy for herself, and he couldn't quite bring himself to trust her as easily as he once did. But he loved her, and she loved him, and he didn't want her to be hurt. Not because of him. Never because of him. He'd hurt her enough just existing, no need to do more. A knock on his door interrupted his moping, and Izuku perked up and chirped a nervous, "Come in." Immediately, a man in a trench coat stepped through the door, alongside a woman with a pretty mutation-based quirk that made her skin several different shades of blue with silvery white and dewy looking. She had webbed, tendril-like frills instead of fingers, for arms, and a bald head, with large, completely blue-black eyes. Her smile was kind, and the business suit she wore was a navy blue with coral pink highlights. "You're really pretty," Izuku blurted, before flushing brightly. The woman's smile brightened, if anything, and a gentle swaying movement behind her exposed a long, thin tail with a smaller set of frills than her forearms had. "Thank you, Midoriya-kun," she said, her voice a low alto with a strangely trilling undertone that made Izuku's eyes brighten with interest. "It's thanks to my quirk, Blue Glaucus. It means I have the appearance and the abilities of the Blue Glaucus sea slug, which doesn't sound very glamorous, but makes me very pretty, doesn't it?" She waved at herself with her frilled hands, and Izuku bobbed his head excitedly. "What else does it let you do?" he asked her eagerly. The woman walked over and carefully sat in one of the 2 chairs a nurse had moved next to his bed, the trench-coated man, who was smiling gently, joining her in the other chair. "Blue Glaucus lets me skate along water surfaces on windy days, as long as I'm belly down," the woman told him warmly. "And it means I need a specific diet, mostly poisonous things like jellyfish and other types of seafood. It also means that I store the nematocysts from jellyfish within my body and can release a nasty sting if I get scared." "So cool," Izuku breathed, eyes sparkling as the woman offered him one of her larger, frilled hands, and Izuku took it reverently, turning it over and touching the palm of her hand, feeling the oddly damp feeling of the silvery-toned skin there. "My name is Uchiyumi Yoko, by the way," the woman introduced herself. "I'm with Child Services, and I'm here so that you're protected when talking with this man here," she told him, nodding at the inn beside her, who sat forward and bobbed his head at Izuku in a shallow bow that Izuku hurriedly returned, anxiety returning even as his fingers continued to tentatively trace the patterns and freckles of blue that decorated Uchiyumi-san's hand. "I am Detective Tsukachi Naomesa," the man introduced, reaching up with a gloved hand and plucking his hat off to hold it in his hands respectfully. "I'm here to get your statement and see if we can't find any clues as to what happened to your apartment, all right?" Izuku felt his anxiety spike, and pulled his hand away from Uchiyumi-san's hand to hastily bury a harsh cough into his elbow. He started, uncertainly, and Uchiyumi-san set one of her smaller, frilled hands on his shoulder as her others pulled open a binder and dug a pen out of her side bag. "If you're uncomfortable or want to stop at any time, Midoriya-kun, you can," she told him firmly, gently. "You aren't in trouble or a suspect or anything of the sort. You are a child who has been through a traumatizing experience, you're hurt, and you have every right to be scared or not want to talk about what happened." "You're damn right he does," a familiar drawling voice stated. Izuku's head shot up, sharp relief filling him at the familiar form of Giran-san in the doorway beside a nurse. "Ah, this is Kajiro Oka-san," the nurse informed the other 2 adults as Giran-san stalked over and around the bed to reach out and set one of his large hands on Izuku's head, making the boy close his eyes and lean against his mentor trustingly. "He is one of Midoriya-kun's emergency contacts. The others, the Puga family, will be arriving here soon as well." "Thank you, Sakata-san," Tsukachi told the nurse calmly, politely. The nurse nodded and quickly left, and Izuku leaned into Giran-san as soon as the man sat next to him on the bed wrapping one heavy arm over his shoulders. "You had questions for the kiddo?" Giran-san asked as Izuku slumped against him tiredly, biting back another cough. "I do," Tsukachi-san agreed, eyeing Giran-san cautiously before offering Izuku another kind smile. "Really, I just need a statement from Midoriya-kun, and then I'll ask a few routine questions. You should be aware that my quirk, lie detector, is constantly on and can't be turned off. Izuku's attention snapped to the detective, eyes sparkling as he sat up suddenly, leaning towards the man with keen interest. Going by the name of it, I guess that means you can tell when anyone is lying, right? The detective nodded with a slow blink, and Izuku all but vibrated. Can your quirk tell which part of an answer is a lie? What if the person you're questioning doesn't know it's a lie? What if it's only a half-truth? What if the person you're questioning says something that is the truth, but they personally disagree with it? Does that ring as a lie? Can you not lie to yourself without setting it off? Since you can't turn it off, do you need suppression cuffs or support gear to go places where quirk use is forbidden? How does it work with court cases? What if someone lies for someone else? What? Giran's hand roughly ruffled his hair, making Izuku cut himself off, ears going red as he smiled sheepishly at the slowly blinking, wide-eyed detective. Kiddo, we gotta work on your babbling, the man chuckled lowly. First rule of prioritizing, kiddo. Important things come first, Izuku dutifully recited. Once everything important is done, secondary needs can be taken care of. Then and only then can unimportant ones be focused on. Giran ruffled his hair again, and Izuku smiled sheepishly up at him, before sending a bashful smile over to the still-dazed-looking detective and the thoroughly amused-looking Uchimi-san. Sorry, Tsukachi-san. I really like analyzing quirks. Not a problem, Midoriya-kun, the detective managed, blinking twice rapidly before offering him a small smile. Let's just go over everything about the incident first, and if we have time, I'll happily answer some of your questions, okay? Izuku bobbed his head happily, lighting up, and Giran chuckled lowly, making an aborted movement towards the pocket Izuku knew held his cigarettes. Let's start from the beginning, all right, and work our way from there. The detective pulled out a recorder, and Izuku took a deep breath before beginning. He explained about waking up to the sound of breaking glass. The way the fire erupted too fast and too hot to be normal. The sizzling, crackling liquid that fed the flames. The way the fire blocked the entire front of the apartment, how they couldn't get out that way. His Kachin using her quirk to force his usually stuck window open so they could climb out. Of her taking the brunt, the pain of his arm hitting the ground, the pain in his body. He ended with how he'd blacked out, and Tsukachi nodded solemnly. Giran-san is warm stone next to him, seemingly relaxed, but the muscles Izuku can feel are iron-hard with tautness, a boiling rage beneath his casual demeanor that reminds Izuku more than ever of an angry tiger with no prey in sight. Izuku knows that, if they didn't have company, Giran-san would be pacing, and, if they weren't in a hospital, he'd be chained smoking like a dragon. His fury makes the anxious fear that's still in Izuku's chest fade away. No one will ever get away with hurting him if Giran is around. His trust is absolute in this, unquestionably fact. The sky is blue, the grass is green, he is quirkless, and Giran-san will always protect him and, bearing that, will always avenge him. It's a heady feeling, this trust, something rarely given to adults or children alike, and Izuku cherishes it like the precious gift it is, even if it's a gift he gives instead of receives. I'm sorry you had to go through that, Midoriya-kun, Tsukachi-san tells him somberly, seriously, and Izuku does his head in an uncomfortable nod, looking away, burrowing into Giran-san's side for comfort even as one of those familiar, large hands soothingly rubs the part of his arm that's bare above his cast. I only have a few questions if you're feeling up to answering them. At his side, Uchimi-san gives him a pointed look with her pretty blue-black eyes, a reminder that he can stop this at any time, and it comforts Izuku enough to have him nodding at the detective. Can you think of anyone that would want to hurt you or your cousin? Izuku hesitated, frowning slightly. I don't know about Kachin, the almost 10-year-old answered uncertainly. She's not, He took a slow breath, then carried on, shoulders straighter as he forced himself to sit up slightly. Kachin has difficulties connecting to others. She's always kind, but she doesn't, interact socially very well. Her anxiety makes it, difficult. I used to have the same problem, but I've been working on my confidence more. He breathed out slowly and sent a bright smile up at Giran-san, who smiled back and set a hand on his head comfortingly. "And you're doing a hell of a job, kiddo," he told him warmly. Stutters almost completely gone, chins up, shoulders straight. "Practically a different kid entirely," he chuckled, and Izuku giggled softly back before turning his attention back to the detective. "I can't think of anyone specific that would do this if they were after me," he told the man honestly, frowning. "But I can't put it past some people," he added, a darker tone, lips thinning as he looked away, glaring down at his knees. "Can you explain a little more, Midoriya-kun?" the detective asked. Izuku felt his casted arm ache as his hands tried to form fists, his glare getting stronger as he stared determinedly at his knees. "I've been making waves at school," he said quietly, tightly. And some people, they don't like the status quo changing. No one said anything, not where I can hear, but I don't doubt that some people are angry. After all," he lifted his head, lifted his chin as he looked at the detective with a tight smile and angry. "It's not every day the quirkless doormat decides to grow a spine." Tsukachi blinked twice, before a small frown curled his lips. "You think this is a hate crime," the detective said, not a question but a statement, and Izuku jerks a shoulder and looks away briefly before forcing himself to meet the detective's eyes again. "Maybe," he answered simply. "But it could be revenge for something else. Like I said, I've been making waves." "What kind of waves?" Tsukachi asked. Izuku offered him his tiger smile, teeth glinting and jaw clenched. "The kind of waves that makes people uncomfortable. The kind of waves that mean the teachers have to actually do their jobs instead of just letting things slide because I'm quirkless and the others aren't. Everyone has secrets, Tsukachi-san, and for years and years no one's been worried about whether the worthless quirkless would notice them. But here's the thing, Tsukachi-san," Izuku's tiger smile grew harder, sharper, even closer to Giran's. "I notice far more than anyone is willing to believe. And I forget nothing." A shiver of unease made Naomesa's fingers twitch. He recognized the man curled up around the boy on the bed, the information broker of the underground, Giran, real name Kajiro Okuda. And, although he'd never seen the man in a setting like this, never seen him protective rather than blasé, Naomesa still recognized the danger present. Giran was hovering, but not as if he was afraid for the kid, no. It was hovering in the same way a predator with cubs hovers. A confidence that they're more than able to defend their cub, even as that cub strikes out on their own. And a willingness to hunt down any threats, vehemently. He knows then that, unless he manages to find the arsonist first, the only thing that'll be left of them is a tortured corpse. Across from him, hovering over the shoulders of the small, bright boy with tiny, newly bared fangs, Giran eyes meet his, and the tiger smiles. And Naomesa grimly wondered if he was witnessing the origins of the next generation's underground kingpin right here in this hospital. Quietly, grimly, his quirk sang true, and Naomesa felt dread curl in his throat as he watched the small boy turn towards the tiger of the underground, not a twitch of unease in his body language. And as Midoriya Izuku smiled sweetly up at the tiger smiled back, and Naomesa knew that the future was in for one hell of a problem. Tiger, burning bright. Bakuga Mitsuki was as volatile and obstinate as her brat. Loud and crude and quick to snap at people making stupid FING mistakes. It's probably why she and Masaru worked so well, to be honest. She had a short fuse, was quick to yell, while his fuse was a few 100 kilometers long and he'd only raised his voice, twice in the last 15 years they'd known one another? And considering the way their brat acted, she's surprised it hasn't happened more often. But he was her rock, the steady, unflinching wall between her volatile personality and the waves of emotions that threatened to yank her off her feet and drown her sometimes. And as he held her hand to keep her from racing through the hospital to get to her best friend and basically nephew's sides, she was grateful for the sturdy, warm hold of his hand in hers. It grounded her as she bit back a snap as the nurse walked so FNG slowly towards the Midoriya's rooms. "Midoriya-san isn't allowed visitors at the moment," the nurse informed them quietly as they walked. "She's being prepped for spinal surgery and is currently being held in a medically induced coma to keep her from moving at all." Mitsuki felt the blood drain rapidly from her face, her hand clenching painfully tight around her husband's as he blanched as well, the arm he had around Katsuki's shoulders pulling him in tightly, protectively. A coma. In coma, she thought, almost disbelieving, a rearing denial fighting in the back of her throat at the thought of her all-but sister of going on 30 years being in a coma. And what about Izuku? Masaru asked, snapping Mitsuki's attention immediately back to the present, because that's right, Izuku would need them, her nephew would need them right now. He was probably so scared. The doctors want to hold him for a few more nights, until they're sure there's definitely no permanent damage from the smoke inhalation, and his arm will be in a cast for a good while, seeing as it broke in 3 places and fractured further in others. But he's able to have visitors, and Okuda-san has been very attentive while visiting. Mitsuki's ears perked, her eyes narrowing. Kajiro? She demanded. The nurse nodded guilelessly as she led them down yet another hallway. Okuda Kajiro, Midoriya-kun's other emergency contact. The nurse replied easily. Masaru's eyes caught hers, equally shocked and wary. Inko had never mentioned any Kajiro to them. It's precious, seeing the two of them together. Midoriya-kun even has a nickname for him. Although, I don't really know why he uses Giran of all nicknames. I mean, it doesn't really make too much sense to me, but perhaps it's got something to do with his quirk? Well, anyways, here we are, she declared, and Mitsuki barely held herself back from shoving past the ditzy woman as she knocked on the door before opening it. Instead, she stalked through once it was considered polite, her sharp eyes darting first and foremost over the limp form of her nephew, pointedly ignoring the man in a business suit sat beside the bed, working on a laptop. Izuku looked so effing small, wrapped up in bandages with a cast covering his entire arm from just below the shoulder down to his hand. He was asleep, probably on some good FNG drags, but the dark circles under his eyes made him look pale and drawn. Pain zest the life out of people, she remembered, something Masaru told her years ago after the last time she'd visited her dickhead of a dad in the hospital, put there by his own idiocy and the quirk of one of his dumbass wannabe villain buddies. She remembered it now because when she'd been younger, he'd been big and mean and larger than life, towering over everyone she knew with a cruel, mean-edged smile and hard red eyes. But that day, in that hospital as she said her goodbyes, he'd been thin, gaunt in a way that made him seem meek, even if he never knew the meaning of the word. Izuku was a bright, warm light in the word, but, here and now, he was like a snuffed-out candle. The wick was still wisping smoke and glowing faintly, and she found herself moving forward, slowly sinking her fingers into those messy green-black curls of his, a tremble going through her. "Oh, baby," she whispered hoarsely, achingly, as Masaru joined her, wrapping his free arm around her shoulder as Katsuki stood, frozen stiff and wide-eyed, taking in the damage some a-hole had done. "I hope whatever sick F did this burns," she hissed, hoarse and choked but venomous as the raging fire in her chest threatens to drown out everything else, a tear slipping down her cheek as her free hand clenched into a fist so tight her joints ached. "That makes 2 of us, sweetheart." The drawling, bland tone of the unknown man on the other side of her nephew's bed drew her gaze, and she glared fiercely, consideringly, as her red eyes met his pink. Unprepossessing, she decided as she eyed him suspiciously. He was almost muddied compared to the room around him. Washed-out dilute lavender hair, pale pink eyes, skin that was that slightly off shade between too pale and lightly tan that seemed almost fake. A pair of pale gray, round sunglasses clipped to a rumpled dress shirt a shade paler than his hair, nicely cut and obviously tailored, sleeves rolled up his arms. An iris-purple suit jacket to match the slacks he wore was thrown over the back of his chair. Large, blunt-fingered hands at the end of deceptively muscled arms, a few scars she recognized from her childhood as knife cuts peeking here and there. A plain gold chain hung from his neck, gold-plated, the links were separated by something almost like paracord. Eyeing him, this bland, inconspicuous man who arched a brow and offered her the attempt of a flirtatious smile that was just a bit too tired and tense to be serious, but showed off the large gap in his teeth, Mitsuki decided then and there that this man was not only bad news, but that it was clear he cared for her nephew. "Then we're in good effing company, fuckface," she told him, baring her teeth in a half-snarl as the man's pink eyes lit up with amusement and ruefulness as he chuckled at her. Shifting, the man placed his now-closed laptop off to the side and stood, carefully leaning over Izuku to offer her his hand with a much less sleazy smile. "Okay, Kajiro, at your service," he greeted her calmly. "Although, you might have heard of me from Kido's ma as Giran-san. I've been teaching him about law and business practice for the last, 2 years now." Mitsuki hummed lowly, clasping his hand in hers firmly, but not tightly, and shaking it once. Her red eyes stayed locked on his face, unflinching, considering every move he made and didn't make. "Bakugu Mitsuki," she returned quietly, or as quietly as she ever got, jerking her head to Masaru as her quiet husband offered the man his hand to shake as well, those usually gentle eyes she loved so much going sharp and considering as her husband nodded at him. "Masaru, my husband, and Katsuki, my brat." She nodded at her brat, who was glaring at Okuda like he'd told him All Might was a sheet hero or something. Okuda nodded back calmly, before stretching with a grunt as his back popped loudly and in multiple places from the sound of it. "With you all here, I'm gonna finally take a demon smoke break," he grunted tiredly. "Didn't want to leave the kiddo by himself, so I haven't had a smoke in hours," he grumbled good-naturedly, before waving a hand towards the room's mini-fridge and the extra chairs sat near the window. "Help yourselves to the goodies in the fridge. I brought a bunch of sheet, 'cause I fucking hate hospital food and didn't think the kiddo should be forced to deal with that bullshit as well. I'll be back in about 20 minutes or so," he stretched again with a groan as he pulled his jacket up. "Getting too dim and old to be sleepin' in shitty chairs," he grumbled as he left, and Mitsuki watched him with considering eyes. "I fucking hate that a-hole," Katsuki growled. Mitsuki's attention shot to him. "He's a fucking weirdo and Deku's been FNG weird since they started hanging out." "Weird how?" Mitsuki asked sharply. "And why the F didn't you tell anyone about him, then?" Katsuki scowled back at her, arms crossing as he scoffed and tried to turn away, only for her to grab his ear and shake him like a misbehaving puppy. "Fag," Katsuki snapped, and Mitsuki bared her teeth right back and waited. Masaru slipped around them to grab them the spare chairs as Katsuki finally answered. "I don't fucking know, just weird. He doesn't get pushed around anymore and he made a couple of the extras fucking cry over stupid shit, alright? And why the F would I mention him? Auntie knows about him. Talks about him and everything. Always a skin me if Deku and I are having fun playin' and shit, like I'd play with the fucking nerd." Yanking his head away, Mitsuki let him go, eyes narrowed as her son sulked angrily, before forcibly calming herself, taking slow, steadying breaths. Masaru brushed a hand comfortingly over her shoulder, and she turned her head to give him a soft smile as he pressed a tender kiss to her temple. "But she loved him. I think," he started, voice low and calm, steady as the mountain, "that Okuta-san has been teaching Izuku about having self-confidence and self-worth, and that, in response, Izuku has been taking a proactive response towards those classmates of yours who pick on him. And I think we've told you, on multiple occasions Bakugu Katsuki, that you're not to call him Deku. Haven't we?" And immediately, Katsuki's angry sulk turned into a pout, shoulders hunching as he grumbled a whatever, and looked away, and Mitsuki flashed her husband a grin because of course he was the only one who could talk sense into their little firecrackers' thick-butt skull. He did it for her, after all, and Katsuki got most of his bullshit from her. "We'll talk to him, keep an eye on him, and figure what the F his deal is," she declared firmly, crossing her arms even as she folded one leg over the other, clenching her fingers in her shirt as she watched Izuku's thin, bandage-wrapped chest rise and fall steadily, a hoarseness to each breath that worried her. "But, if he's on Izuku's emergency contacts, has been teaching him sheet for a few years now, and Inko hasn't done anything about it, chances are he's good for Izuku. And as long as that keeps being the case, we'll let him slide on his obviously skeevy bullshit. But we'll keep an eye on him." Masaru nods agreeably next to her, and Katsuki rolls his eyes, but she knows he was already keeping watch, from the sound of. She's known Midoriya Inko since elementary school. She's always watched out for her best friend. It was practically tradition now, something she'd made sure of. Wherever a Midoriya went, a Bakugu would be there to watch their backs. And yeah, Katsuki was a little sheet, was rude and crude, and she didn't doubt his dumbass had been, at the very least, calling Izuku names at school, but she trusted her kid to have Izuku's back when it came to serious shit, and she'd straighten him out if he stepped out of line where she could see it or hear it. She'd been a little shit too, after all. And then Midoriya Izuku had needed her help, and she'd straightened up. She had no doubt that, push comes to shove, her brat would back Izuku 100% and come out better for it. It's what bakugus do for their loved ones, after all. When Mitsuki finds out the extent of the bullshit her son tried to put Izuku through, that it took an angry, protective man who was definitely too skeevy for comfort but who cared for Izuku deeply, to make her son man the F up and stop being a little sheet. She was sad, but it was torn in 4 different directions, aimless, a festering irritation that she couldn't express properly at the time. She was said that Katsuki thought hurting someone just for fun was okay, that he'd fallen into that dangerous mindset, just like her dad had years ago. She was said at Okuta for not coming to her about it, for not letting her deal with her brat, but that anger was torn with gratefulness because she didn't know exactly how well the lesson would have stuck in Katsuki's thick skull if it had just been her. She was said at Inko for not telling her, not talking to her about it, or maybe for not even seeing how dangerous that was, for both their boys, but she'd known Inko since elementary. She knew her best friend's mindsets when the anxiety and self-doubt and fear of abandonment got too strong, so that anger fizzled out to exhausted frustration rather quickly. But most of all, Mitsuki was sad at herself, for not seeing the signs, not recognizing the mindset her son had been raised in by that FNG school. The might is right mindset that had let her dad feel powerful and like he had the right to hurt her and her mom, like he had a right to do what he wanted because his quirk, magnesium, had let him shoot magnesium flares from his hands. He'd used it to hurt, to control, and he'd used it with his buddies to try and rob a bank, which had gotten him killed in the end. But he'd been raised by people who'd believed that Destro fucker back in the day, so of FNG course he'd believed he'd had the right to do shit. But she'd thought she'd raised Katsuki better, that she'd been able to change their history even a little bit to keep him away from the horror story that her childhood almost became. Yet, here she was, with a child who'd been taught that hurting those weaker than him was not only okay but was right. And she would not FING have it. A few days after Izuku had been released from the hospital into Okuta's care, Inko still in a coma but all expenses paid by the skeevy man, Mitsuki sat her son and husband down and laid down the law. Katsuki was removed from Aldra Middle School and placed in therapy. He'd started to throw a fit, tried to shout at her, but Masaru had backed her up as always. He would go to therapy, would follow the prerequisite number of sessions before being allowed to go to his new, private school, or he could kiss his parental permission to try the hero course exam in the future out the goddamn window. Mitsuki may not have noticed when her son had started acting like her father, but you could be dimly sure she would put an end to it. Living with Giran-sen was interesting to say the least. It was obvious that the 3-bedroom apartment the older man had brought him to once out of the hospital was newly bought. The whole place it smelled new, even when it was fully furnished and all the cabinets and fridge stocked to the teeth. There was even a couple of different game consoles and a new laptop set up in what Giran-san told him was his room. All this shit is your to keep once you and your ma are set back up again, the older man informed him seriously. I got the 3rd room set up for her, for when she's released from the hospital. Already got a list of people that'll help out with physical therapy and emotional therapy and all that shit, all of 'em clean-nosed for the most part, legitimate and shit, so you don't have to worry about any assholes fucking you or your ma over. Izuku had cried with relief and gratefulness, making Giran-san roll his eyes and ruffle his hair affectionately even as the man ordered him to take his meds and explore his new laptop. Giran-san was a lot like what he thought touch-ins should be, Izuku decided after a week. He wasn't a worrier, wasn't prone to poking his head into Izuku's room and asking him what he was doing, not like his Kachin did. But he was there for all 3 meals, made sure to remind Izuku about his meds if Izuku got stuck in an analysis, and was more than willing to sprawl out on the couch next to him to talk about whatever show they were watching at the time. He'd even gotten Izuku into this show called How It's Made, which was just episode after episode of learning how everyday objects, chemicals, and even medicines were made. Basic fucking chemistry and a lil common sense can save your life, kiddo. Giran had told him groggily as they watched an episode about toothpaste, drain cleaner, and baking soda at 3 in the morning. Can't tell ya how many times some fucknut tried to screw me over in the early days with cut sheet. And then there were the field trips, for lack of a better word. Since he was recovering and the arsonist hadn't been caught yet, by the police or by Giran-san, to the man's slowly growing irritation, Izuku had been pulled from Aldra, not that it mattered since the police were investigating it thanks to his mention of the possibility of the fire being a hate crime. Because of this, however, Izuku found himself bored when left at home. So, instead of letting him just laze about watching TV or going link-hopping online and falling down the intellectual rabbit hole, Giran-san had started taking him to his less dangerous meetings. And Izuku had, of course, known Giran-san wasn't a nice man, was even a criminal. It was obvious, after all, but there was knowing that Giran-san did illegal things for work. Then there was watching his mentor break a man's hand for trying to cheat him on a crate of apparently expensive chemicals that Giran-san already had a buyer for. It happened so fast that Izuku didn't even have time to do anything but blink a couple times in shock. Giran-san had brought him to a warehouse. The same silver-haired lady who'd been there when Izuku met Michi-sen was there too. She stood at their backs, more behind Izuku than Giran-san, and her job was to guard them, apparently, in case anyone tried to ambush them or backstab them or anything. Her name was Gina, and Izuku thought her quirk, Quicksilver Shield, was super cool. But he was getting distracted. They were there to pick up a crate of medical-specific chemicals, really expensive to buy legally and nearly as bad to buy illegally, but Giran-san had apparently worked with this guy's predecessor for a few years before he got arrested and had someone who needed them desperately enough to pay Giran-san a lot of money. So here they were. The guy who brought the crate had a mutation quirk that made him almost burnt orange-colored, with spiky protrusions all over his head, shoulders, and back. He introduced himself as Dai, had tried to have a friendly conversation with Giran-san about the traffic or something. Izuku wasn't sure. To be honest, his arm was aching, and his next dose of medication wasn't for another hour, so, beyond a cursory delight of seeing a new quirk, Izuku had been sitting on one of the spare crates tiredly when it happened. Giran-san had been examining one of the jars of medicine, smiling his tiger smile, before he gently set it down the bottle. And then he had moved. One moment, Dai had been a few feet away, cheerfully asking if it was all Giran-san had thought it would be, and then he was on his knees, choking on a scream as Giran-san had one of his hands slammed down on the crate ledge. From where he was, Izuku could see that the bones of the other's hand were badly broken, the half of his hand that connected to his fingers bent backward unnaturally, the bones almost poking through the palm of his hand. He didn't really have time to even register what he was seeing before Giran-san was standing tall again and Dai was curled up on the ground, weeping over his hand and cursing the gray-haired man out. Izuku hesitantly looked over his shoulder at Gina, who blinked placidly back at him, as if this were all just an average part of their day. And Izuku decided not to think too hard about it. Not here, when the risk of ambush or retaliation was too high. Push any panic back. Hide it, control it, don't let an enemy see any weakness. Giran-san's words echoing in his head, a matter of survival, of strength. Bare your teeth and unsheathe your claws until you're safe in your den and away from the enemy. Then you could lick your wounds. But not before, never before. Tigers showed no weakness. Weakness was a death sentence. See, this is why I preferred working with Takanawa, Giran-san stated, cool and calm and still smiling. He was polite, professional, you know? And never, not once, was he stupid enough to try and cheat me. F you. Dai choked out, snarling even as he wept. I ain't no fucking cheat. Giran-san hummed, non-committal, and then glanced over at Izuku. Kachi, kiddo, come here real quick, he called. Izuku blinked slowly before carefully hopping off his crate and cautiously wandering over. Giran-san picked up the same bottle he had examined earlier and handed it to him. Tell me what's wrong with this bottle. Izuku blinked tiredly before accepting the bottle and looking it over. The bottle itself was just the average injector bottle, squat and thin-walled and breakable. The medication inside, some sort of medicine that was supposed to aid skin regeneration after severe injuries. Izuku vaguely remembered reading an article about it during one of his boredom-induced binges. It was clear liquid, slightly more viscous than water, and those injected with it said it made them feel cold and tingly for a few minutes after injection. The liquid in the bottle was slightly cloudy, and it clung to the sides of the bottle more than it should have. Eyes narrowing, Izuku turned and began poking through the crate. There were 30 jars of the medication, and as he quickly poked through them, Izuku found 4 more bottles that were different. At first glance, you wouldn't be able to tell, but considering the legality of the situation, the amount of money that could be both lost or made, and depending on exactly who Giran-san was selling these to, Izuku felt any sympathy he'd had for Dai fade away, replaced by the familiar sharp bitter bite of his carefully caged anger. 5 of these bottles are tampered with, Izuku stated, setting the 5 bottles down quietly. There may be others that were tampered with to a lesser degree, but these 5 of definitely not right. Giran-san ruffled his hair affectionately as Izuku sent a cold stare towards Dai. He was still on the ground, still cradling his hand and still had tears falling down his face, but the anger was gone now, replaced with trepidation, with fear. The mean thing in Izuku's chest that had been growing steadily over the past few months bared its teeth and purred. Dai? Even Kachi can spot a cheat, not that it's surprising with how smart my kiddo is. But, see, this just won't do, you know? If I can't trust my suppliers, my buyers can't trust that I'll get them the absolute best products. And you know what we call it when our buyers can't trust us? Izuku nodded, even as Dai's eyes darted between them, a slow realization mixing with dread. It's called being bad for business, Izuku stated simply, calmly, and, side by side, Giran and Izuku smiled. Nakata Dai had thought this would be an easy score. When his uncle got arrested and no one else had stepped up to take over, he'd thought it would be his chance. So, he started reaching out to his uncle's contacts, started selling the things his uncle had. And, yeah, sometimes he slipped a little something, special into the supplies. Never a lot, only a fragment of the total. Just enough that it could be brushed off later as faulty product or contaminated in transit or something. Half these dumbfucks couldn't tell saline from morphine until after they shot up after all, so diluting one with some of the other was easy enough to slide past. His uncle had always talked big about some broker a-hole, calling him the tiger of the underground, the kingpin, or just Giran with this tone. So, when Dai had reached out, he'd expected some terrifying monster, someone big and terrifying, the kind of sheet-you-pants scary his uncle had always hinted at. He hadn't expected some dumbass-looking businessman in a janky suit with a fucking kid. The guy looked like he'd flinch if Dai breathed in his direction too hard. So, yeah, he tried to slip one past the dumbass suit. Now he knew what his uncle had meant when he called Giran a tiger. And looking between the crazy F who had just mutilated his hand and the kid who'd gone from tired surprise to cold-eyed smile, who looked like he'd hold Dai's hand down so that his daddy could do worse, Dai wondered if he'd survive this encounter. He'd never cheat anyone again if he did. He may be the idiot his mama always said he was, but there was one thing he knew for damn sure. His uncle didn't raise him to F up on the same thing twice. Now he just had to survive the tiger and his cub, and he'd go back to legitimate trades. He swears to thank God he would. Welcome to the FANG jungle. Giran closed the door to the kiddo's room carefully, breathing out a soft breath as he did. The issue with the a-hole who thought he could cheat them had gone favorably, he knew. There was always a chance of Izuku balking, of him freaking out and showing that Giran's kiddo was too soft, or that Giran was too soft to train the kiddo properly. He'd named the kiddo publicly, without ordering anyone to hold their tongues about him and enforcing the order. If Izuku had turned around in that moment, had shouted or cried or told him to stop, had questioned him in front of the others, well, Dai would be a corpse, and so would Gina most likely, a DM in shame. She was an excellent bodyguard, and he'd be having a very different and most likely difficult conversation with the kiddo. But he'd stepped up to the plate beautifully. Had exceeded Giran's expectations, even. He hadn't flinched or gagged or anything while Giran taught Dai a lesson, and Giran was dead proud of him. Still, just because the kiddo was finally dipping his toes into Giran's pond, didn't mean he was about to throw him into the deep end. Which was why Giran had waited until the kiddo had eaten his dinner and taken his meds, waited until he was fast asleep and lightly snoring in his room, not get to work. He'd gotten a tip from an informant for one of the dealers across town, and he intended to check it out. If it proved profitable, he'd have to award the little sheet. Smiling darkly at the screen of his laptop, Giran began to look through the information provided. He was getting ever closer to the arsonist. It was only a matter of time. Tiger, burning bright. It had been a week since the warehouse incident, as he called it to himself, and Izuku had just. He had been thinking about it a lot. To the point he'd gotten Giran to grab him some new notebooks, these ones bright green, unlike his black Quirk analysis books, his yellow business books, or his blue school books. He had some red ones as well, but those were his hero books. Not about heroes, but what he thought he would be like as a hero. They were special, and tucked away in his closet so no one could see the tear stains and burn marks that still marked them. No one had the right to see them but him. No one gets to see his weaknesses. Anyways, the green books. Vent books, for lack of a better term. The first few days after the warehouse incident, Izuku had been plagued with doubts, nightmares, and anxiety. He'd had a panic attack, something Giran had sat next to him and helped him through, and at that point, Izuku realized that the jumbled, flinching way his thoughts had fallen into were not okay. If he couldn't focus, couldn't control himself, he was a liability, and liabilities were bad for business, and he didn't want that. He knew Giran would never hurt him. Trusted in that, an unwavering trust in the fact of it. But, if Izuku proved to be unfit for the sort of business Giran let him see, Izuku had no doubt he'd be pulled back. Be locked out of that part of his mentor's life, and he couldn't do that. Couldn't handle the idea that Giran would have to leave him behind because he couldn't trust Izuku to stay steady. So yeah, the green books. He'd spent a full day creating a whole new cipher, then a second cipher that would be written a completely different way, then using the first cipher written the way the second cipher was, just to make doubly sure no one could read anything in the green books. It was the only way he could think to keep the information safe. He gave anyone named in it nicknames too, to add to the safety of it before he even considered writing. And then, once he was sure it was absolutely safe to write, that no one would be able to understand what he was talking about at all, he began writing. It was cathartic, he decided, after he'd finished 2 of the 5 notebooks in an hour. That was the word, right? Cathartic? The feeling of being almost hollow in his head and chest, like he'd carved something out and gotten it all away from him, like squeezing pus out of an infected cut? It hurt, but it needed to be done. So, Izuku took the hurt in his head and heart, all that angry hurt, scared, confused angry that was infecting him, and just squeezed. And in ink and tear stains, and a few smears of blood from a nasty paper cut that hurts still, 3 days later, Izuku poured everything he was into those green books. The hurt and confusion and bitterness that had been building in him since he was told he was quirkless. The hurt and rage and disbelief of everyone first turning on him, then fearing him once he grew a spine. The torn feelings of satisfaction and self-loathing of making his once bullies flinch back, of making Dai regret trying to cheat them. The adoration and hero worship and praise hunting for Giran. The bitterness and hurt and shame he felt about his Kachin. He poured everything into those books, and then he used the little safe Giran had gotten him, that was supposed to be used for valuable information or items, and hid them away. And now, he was here, emptied out and hollow and not quite disassociated, but laying down starfish style on his floor. Staring up at the glow-in-the-dark stars and hero stickers he'd stuck up there, Izuku pondered on his freshly cleaned, impersonalized thoughts, and decided to look at the facts. Fact: Giran was a villain. An information broker, the broker if what others inferred was true. Fact: Giran was training him to, maybe not take over from him, but definitely start his own network one day, most probably villainous in nature. Fact: those same villainous acts had been helping keep a roof over his and his Kachin's head for years now, and would hunt down the one who took said roof from them. Fact: Giran was not pushing him to take over or start any villain-like jobs at all. Was actually avoiding pulling him into the deep end, and was, instead, letting Izuku decide how to react to the little bits of the underground he was getting to see. Fact: Giran thought he could have been a great and dangerous hero, which meant that Giran would have supported him going into heroics despite being a villain and teaching Izuku about what he does. Fact: Giran is the only person who has ever supported Izuku in making his own decisions and also supporting those same decisions. Any disagreements have been because Izuku tried to make said decision without all the information, and then Giran helps Izuku find the information so he could make an informed decision. Fact: Izuku was quirkless, and thus was incapable of becoming a hero. Fact: Izuku was quirkless but was perfectly capable of becoming a villain. Fact: Izuku didn't mind the idea of becoming a villain nearly as much as he probably should. And that was the crux of the matter, wasn't it? Izuku could be a villain, but one like Giran. Someone who works in a business-like setting, who has set rules and guidelines to how he works and who he works with. Giran only worked for those he respected, made a point of it even. It was considered a privilege for Giran to work with you. He also only worked with people face-to-face, although he was willing to do online work or phone calls for particular customers, although very rarely. Izuku could, theoretically, become the kind of villain others looked to for help, for information. He could decide the kind of people he'd work with. He had a choice. He had always wanted to be a hero. The kind of hero that made people feel safe and like they weren't worthless. Maybe. Izuku let his head loll to the side, ignoring the low-grade ache that went through his neck, a reminder of the whiplash that had made the first few days out of the hospital hell. The door to his room was shut, but he could hear the click-clack of Giran typing on his laptop, denoting the irritation at a lost trail of whatever the man was trying to find through his contacts. Fact: Giran was a villain. Fact: Giran was Izuku's hero. If Izuku couldn't be a hero, if he could be a villain, who's to say he couldn't be a villain's hero? There was a shift, a click, in Izuku's chest, like something misaligned being set into place properly, locking in tight and feeling right. The cub lifted his head high, just as the tiger did, and stepped forward. A tiny paw print resting inside a larger paw print, a trail blazed by the tiger, burning so brightly in the cub's heart of heart. The tiger was ahead, was leading, and the cub would follow. And one day, they would walk side by side. And the world would hold its breath when they passed. "All right, kiddo, I need you to listen real close, okay?" Giran announced as they prepared to go to his latest meeting. Izuku immediately paused in the action of stuffing the DS6 into his bag, straightening up and giving his mentor his entire attention. The man's lips quirked up a little, before straightening out into a firm line, pink eyes serious as he took off his sunglasses to hold complete eye contact with the nearly 10-year-old. "The people we are about to meet are not the local assholes I've been having you around," he told Izuku firmly. "They're high-tier villains, the kind that the top 10 try and get as soon as possible. If they didn't have information I need, and I didn't have some supplies they need, I wouldn't even be considering bringing you anywhere near M until you'd at least been blooded, kiddo, and I don't want that to happen for a long but time if I can help it." Izuku flinched, wide-eyed at that. The idea that Giran-san didn't want him near these people unless he'd killed someone was. It didn't exactly make Izuku comfortable. "The only reason I'm bringing you is that they've guaranteed that you won't be harmed," Giran-san told him seriously. "They're willing to owe me if you get hurt, kiddo, and in those circles? That's the same as riskin' everything. And not something even people like this would risk." I understand, Giran-san," Izuku murmured, nibbling his lower lip. Giran set a hand on his head, gently ruffling his hair. "Now, kiddo, you don't gotta worry about dealin' with the head honcho of this group," Giran told him seriously. "That's my job. Your job is to make nice with his heir. He's a twitchy lil sheet, about 5 years older than you. His name is Shigaraki Tamura. He's got a 5-point disintegration quirk. Makes him mean and makes him itchy, and he gets real irritated if you talk about heroes, so none of that, less he brings it up, all right?" Izuku nodded firmly. Shigaraki Tamura, 5-point disintegration, irritable, anti-hero, got it? Izuku listed off quickly. Giran-san nodded with a smirk. "He also likes video games, so there's already something relatively safe that the two of you can discuss," he told Izuku. The boy lit up, bouncing on his toes a little. Ever since he'd been out of the hospital, when he wasn't doing homework or running around with Giran, Izuku had been figuring out video games. Before Giran, they hadn't really been all that interesting. He'd only ever watched others play them, and even then he'd usually get yelled at or sent away because his muttering was distracting. Now that he got to play them himself, however, he'd gained a guilty sort of love for RPG games. His current favorite game was Folktale of Legend, an RPG game that was set in a fantasy world. He particularly liked being a rogue class in it. Anyways, because of his past issues and his current preferences, he hoped that Shigaraki-senpai? Well, he hoped that they could get along. "Let's get going, kiddo," Giran chuckled, ruffling Izuku's hair as he straightened. "We don't want to keep him waiting, do we?" "Right." Izuku agreed, grabbing his bag and following his mentor. He hoped Shigaraki-senpai liked the same games he did. Tamura was sulking. Sensei and the doctor were meeting some important NPC and he'd been told to behave. Apparently, the NPC was bringing his brat, some little kid that would probably be all snotty and annoying, and Tamura was not happy about this. He even had to wear the stupid gloves Kurogiri had gotten him, and, yeah, sure, they made playing video games without dusting the controller easier, but they itched and they were uncomfortable on his dry skin. Sulking in his seat at the bar of the bar Sensei had bought for Kurogiri to run for a legitimate job, Tamura continued playing on his handheld. He pointedly ignored the door opening and Kurogiri greeting the NPC they'd been waiting on, instead focusing on beating the next level in Vigilante Justice 2. He had to get his character to the top of the hero agency without getting spotted by any of the NPCs running around, then he had to steal the quest documents from the hero's desk, escape out the window, and flee from and fight the pursuing hero and his sidekicks. He'd been stuck on the DMN level for 3 days trying to get past the hero in questions, an obvious Endeavor ripoff named Flashfire, and he was determined to get it this time. Absently, he heard the telltale sound of Kurogiri's warp gate, then the sound of someone climbing onto the stool near his. Not directly next to him, but close enough for him to notice, even as his fingers smashed against his handheld's keys loudly as the fight with Flashfire and his equally fire-themed sidekick started. His teeth grit as he struggled not to accidentally crack his game as he fought them off, despite their bullshit cheat of a Regan that they just happened to have FING stupid but cheats. He snarled out a curse as one of the sidekicks got a lucky shot in just as he got Flashfire's health points in the red, stunning his character just long enough to get comboed by the hero and KO'd. Tossing his handheld onto the bar, Tamura crossed his arms and fumed quietly, scowling even as Kurogiri set a bottle of grape ramoon on the bar in front of him. Huffing irritably, he finally turned his attention to the NPC next to him and eyed the kid with irritation. His head looked like broccoli, and he was short. What the hell? Tamura thought Sensei said the kid was, like, 10 or something. The cast that covered the kid's arm from shoulder to fingers was heavy-looking and colored blue, with a couple of squiggled signatures on it. He was playing a game of his own, so at least he wasn't too annoying, and he had the same handheld Tamura did, so he had taste. "Maybe. Flashfire fight screwing you over?" the kid asked, not looking away from his screen, and Tamura grunted, eyes narrowing. "If you can get some flash grenades from the underground broker at the safe zone by the subway, use them on the sidekicks. It took me 6 grenades to get through the fight, but I can't really aim well with my arm like this, so it should only take 3 or 4. Once they're stunned, just tunnel on Flashfire, his defense goes down faster without an ally fighting next to him. Once he's down, the sidekicks are early level difficult." "Well, I mean that's what I did," he added, pausing his game and looking up with a small smile. "I also tend to grind too much, so maybe that plan won't work. I dunno how you run your character skills, so," he shrugged. After a moment, Tamura huffed and scowled at him, reaching for his game and aggressively pulling it close. It was only after he'd made the run to the broker and was back at the beginning of the mission that he spoke. "Shigaraki Tamura," he grunted. The kid hummed. "Hello, Shigaraki-senpai. I'm Kachi." Tamura grunted again and focused on the game. It took him 2 tries to get the timing right with the stun grenades and a lucky long-run combo, but once he got it, he saved his game and looked over at the kid, Kachi. Stupid username if you asked him, but whatever. Kachi was engrossed in his own game, quietly sipping a can of milky Kurogiri had no doubt given him, and Tamura leaned over to look at what he was playing. Kachi shifted obligingly, as he should, giving Tamura ample room to see that he was playing Folktale of Legend offline. And he was a rogue, which Tamura could admit was a decent enough class in the game, but nowhere near as good as the Necromancer class. You play co-op on that or just single? He finally asked, grudgingly impressed with some of the moves the kid's rogue was pulling. Kachi paused the game to blink up at him, big green eyes calm as he smiled. I've never had anyone willing to play with the except randos online, Shigaraki-senpai, but I'd be happy to play co-op with you if you'd let me join your party? He ended it like a question, and Tamura couldn't help but preen, pleased that this NPC was acknowledging his obvious superiority. I main Necromancer and specialize in AoE spells and have a rune-buffed Hydra summons. Tamura felt a vicious grin curl his lips, the tingly sting of them cracking barely registering as he watched the brat's eyes light up, admiration glittering in those big green eyes. That's so cool, the NPC declared. I main rogue and specialize in sneak attacks and assassination, but I've maxed out stealth, dexterity, and my thief skills too. Tamura was honestly a little impressed with that. He tried playing a rogue on a separate save file for a little while, but the prerequisites for the leveling and skill sets were too. For him, the thieving bit was cool, good for loot runs, but he just preferred the firepower the Necromancer and Sorcerer classes had. Well, then welcome to the part. Player 2, Tamura decided, offering his still-gloved hand. Kachi grinned, a surprisingly dangerous-looking smile for such a small kid, and Tamura's estimation of the kid raised a few points. I look forward to working with you, Player 2, Kachi replied, and Tamura giggled without a thought as they grinned widely at one another before he stood up and led the other through a portal and into his room. He'd never gotten to play with anyone either, and the randos online were never at his level anyways. It was rewarding to have a party member he didn't have to carry for once. And one that provided helpful commentary and had apparently memorized the secret spots where uncommon and rare loot could be found. A pleasure doing business with you, Doctor, Giran drawled, neatly closing the suitcase that held both the cash and the information he'd been looking for. The doctor nodded back to him with a sleazy smile, and the TV screen on the table beside him, with its audio-only lights on, whispered out soft static for a moment. It seems young Tamura and young Kachi are bonding over video games, the voice of Sensei announced, sounding both fond and amused, like a pet owner talking about something silly their pet did that morning. It gave Giran the creeps, to be honest, but he wasn't about to say anything about it. Some villains gave off that vibe without trying, and All for One was definitely one of them. No sheet? He asked instead, playing off the same cards, letting a smirk curl his lips and desperately wishing for a cigarette but knowing better than to light up surrounded by various chemicals as he was. Knew my kiddo would work fast, but I wasn't expecting that fast. Color me impressed, he chuckled. Sensei chuckled as well, the deep sound rolling out of the TV speakers like recorded thunder. I can only hope the companionship persists in the future, the boogeyman stated. It would be most beneficial for both of our successors were on amicable terms. Giran allowed a familiar smile to curl his lips, years of practice keeping him from clenching his jaws at the idea of this man anywhere near his kiddo. Hey now, no worries about that, he chuckled instead, spreading his hands out in a welcoming gesture towards the TV. If there's one thing my kiddo and I agree on, it's making decisions that are good for business. Sensei chuckled again, before his screen went black. Giran didn't assume he was gone, however, but bid the doctor farewell and made his way to the waiting warp gate. It dropped him off at the bar, where the nanny where Kurogiri waited with a bottle of expensive scotch and a waiting glass of ice for him. Shigaraki Tamura is attempting to reach a save point before he and young Kachi return, the warper informed him solemnly. I believe a celebratory drink is needed? Why the not? He chuckled, taking a seat on one of the available stools and accepting a single glass, barely more than a shot. He nursed his drink for the next 5 minutes as Kurogiri silently cleaned his glasses and wiped down the bar. After that, the warper straightened up, and a portal opened next to the bar. And then we can team up and do a few dungeon crawls to get some extra loot and equipment we can sell so we can afford the epic armor and that level 7 enchanted grimoire for you. The kiddo babbled as he and the lanky, flaky, figuratively and literally, heir to the boogeyman sauntered out of the warp gate. Sounds like a plan, player 2, Shigaraki rasped, shoulders loose and a surprisingly content expression on his cracked face, lips pulled into a thin, too-wide smile as he shuffled over to the bar. His kiddo caught sight of him and bound over with a bright smile, although it was notably more contained than usual, which Giran approved of. No need to remind anyone here of his kiddo's age with any hyperactivity or bouncing, after all. Ready to go, Kachi? He asked instead. Izuku bobbed his head easily, slipping around him to grab his bag and pull it onto his shoulders. Giran stood and slid his empty cup over the bar to Kurojire's waiting hand before settled on the kiddo's shoulder. As they moved to leave, Izuku looked over his shoulder and offered a small wave. "See you later, player 1. He called. Giran had the dubious pleasure of seeing Shigaraki's cracked face stretch into a ridiculous, gruesome grin, lips cracking nastily and red eyes going near feverish with pleasure at the words. Then, they were out of the bad, and Izuku was slumping slightly against him as they moved towards the car. "So, I see you played nice with the brat," Giran drawled. Izuku peered up at him and offered a slightly shaky smile, no doubt relieved to be out of the bar and back with Giran. This was the first time they'd been separated during a meet-up, after all. Shigaraki-senpai is surprisingly easy to manipulate for someone who's supposed to be the heir to a supervillain, the kiddo informed him quietly. Lack of socialization and too much emotional instability means that he's very moldable. But I just had to offer a suggestion on a single part of a video game and let him watch me play a quest that I'd already beaten to gain his trust, Giran-san. And he invited me into his room to play games. The expression on the kiddo's face had twisted, disbelief edged with suspicion, and Giran couldn't exactly blame him. Inviting unknowns into your inner sanctum over such little information just wasn't practical. Hell, the kiddo had never been to his actual apartment, for FS sake. "Use that to your advantage, kiddo," he stated simply, easily, as they reached the car finally. "After all, any advantage is good for business," Izuku finished, grinning up at him cheerfully before moving to get into the back seat. Giran chuckled, setting his suitcase of goods on the front seat before climbing in. "Dian right, kiddo," he replied as he climbed into the driver's seat. "What do you want for dinner, champ?" "Katsudon." The boy cheered. Giran chuckled as he started driving towards home. "Sounds like a plan to me, kiddo." Later that night, after the kiddo had passed out, Giran pulled out the folder of information that had cost him half the money he would have gotten for the shipment of chemicals he'd delivered to All for One's goon. The light from the lamp next to him flashed ominously over his sunglasses as he flipped it open and began to read. Hasegawa Shiro. Quirk, flint teeth. Teeth made of flint. Capable of causing small sparks when snapping jaws together quickly. Current occupation: fencer, hired hand, thug. Afterwards followed a long list of information about his local haunts, hidey holes, backup holes, and the addresses and haunts of his closest companions and those most likely to hide him in case the cops start poking around. Hasegawa Shiro, also known as the arsonist. And, beneath that information, was the information on the dead man walking who'd hired him. Giran memorized the information and smiled. Takada Hataka was a simple man. He had a relatively plain quirk called Speed Read, which allowed him to read and comprehend what he'd read far quicker than the average human, but not computer fast, and he still had to work to memorize things, but it was still an okay quirk. It went well with his job as a literacy teacher after all. He had a sweet wife in Chikako-chan, if a little distant, who came from better money than he did and worked at a higher-paying job than he did, but she was sweet and kind and affectionate. And he never wanted her to find out about his little dalliance with Miyazaki Tomiko. It was only a fling, at first, a risky, adrenaline-inducing bit of fun.